I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. With everybody, wait a minute.
Staring out the window, was gonna stop for a sign. That's
when I see you.
Hey, Fox, hold me down, listen. Well, guess what? When I see you, yeah. Hey, sweet Sanita, hey, get happy when you party with me. Hey, Janine, when I see you, yeah, I get a little happy. Hey, Tony, I get a little happy when you party with me. Hey, Tim, when I see you, yeah, I get a little happy. Hey, Marlon, I get a little happy when you party with me. Hey, Jay, when I see you, yeah, I get a little happy. Hey, Nico, I get a little happy when I see you. What? Hey, when I see you, yeah. Hey, Playboy, I get a little happy. What? Happy when you party with me. Hey, when I see you.
Wait a minute.
All right.
Hey,
All right, everybody. Come on in. Let me get this out the way. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Peace, 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 peace. Welcome to I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Please like, share, subscribe, support the platform however you feel comfortable. Appreciate you. Welcome, Lena Safi, new member, and Shia Stevens. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And to those who are members, please check the posts, community posts tab, and the poll I just put out. And again, thank you very much. And no, this is not reggae mixed with soul and gospel, although there is obviously all of certainly soul and gospel are probably involved with almost anything produced out of African America. But that's go-go music, just in case anybody's not clear. That is Washington, D.C.'s indigenous, grassroots, community-based, as Dr. Scott Brown has said, the last authentically African practiced music. I think I probably got that wrong. I probably misparaphrasing him, but that's my spin on it. Go-go music, and that's DC Vibe Band, by the way, DC VYBE Band, if anybody is ever interested in following up on them. And yeah, so please definitely check them out. A big salute to the all-stars in the building. Dr. Winkler. I'm tempted to do something public about it, but salute to Dr. Winkler for the personality test I just took and the assessment, and very, very, very revealing and educational, and something. By the way, I should have said this a long time. I think it's something I wish I would have done a long time ago. I think it is proving to be more helpful than I would have admitted a few weeks ago. So if anybody's ever considering, go ahead and sign up for a guided consultation and personality test and see what's what. Did I pass? Well, that's the beauty of it. Ain't no pass fail. There's no fail. It's not pass or fail. It's just explanatory, you know. And of course, speaking of all stars, Hiram Rivera is in the building. Good to see you, my man. And thank you for that rousing discussion, of course, of FIFA and Palestine, and then the subset of the LeBron James Jordan GOAT discussion. Which actually, all jokes aside, is really was you know, when I surveyed the landscape of sports discussions online, that was actually one of the more substantive discussions. So, but it's endlessly producing jokes and comments. So yeah, no, personality test, and you gotta you gotta get with the experts on. I forgot the exact name and all of that, but you answer a series of questions, and then you get them assessed, and you know, Yeah, folks. Yeah, absolutely triggering sports conversations. Yeah, go-go is absolutely ungentrified, and I wouldn't say whites have tried to gentrify it. They have just tried to get in gentrifying DC. They have tried to get go-go out of this. So they haven't tried to gentrify it. They've just tried to get rid of it. And because I think they understand it's not gentrifiable. It's not. It's yeah. I mean, it is. It's and it's really, you see the vibe in the space. It's for live community-based performance with live instrumentation. And yes, they do covers of a lot of songs, but that's part of the fun. That's supposed to be part of the fun. And if folks have been admitting in the comments section, it's better than the original. Most of them are better than the original, almost always. So, all right. So we got a number of things to get to today. And by the way, folks, so off the top, let me start here. Honestly, I just didn't want to risk it this time. So I don't know, and not that I doubt him or his crew, but I know that he's working with some producers on this. But I'm late to it. But if you're, in case you're missing any of it, please go to Wise Intelligence Instagram page and check out the to me, new freestyle drops he's been just dropping lately. And just be reminded of what an actual MC can do when they're in front of a mic. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure to say. Secondly, please, if you are able to, join Saturdays with Renee special live in Newark this Saturday. So obviously, if you're joining virtually, same 11 to 1. But if you're in the Newark, New Jersey area, please check Black Liberation Media. And I'll even put the link, I might even put in the show description already, to the Newark event, special guests, live, etc. Looking like a lot of fun. Oh man. And by the way, speaking of things to check out on Instagram, Poncho McFarland's in the chat. Please not only check our interview about his book, Food Autonomy in Chicago, but there's a lot of great events and stuff being posted on his Instagram as well. So definitely check that also. All right, so I wanted to start off with this. So yesterday in class, in one of my oh so many classes. So I admit, sometimes, especially as I get older, I admit this too. Sometimes I run into a little bit of an energy wall, and every once in a while, it feels like I have to work. I have to just devote more energy to extract from students some sort of involvement, engagement, discussion. And sometimes, between their vibe and my vibe, it's just the vibe is low, the energy level is low. And yesterday was one of those days. And by my third class, where I had just been struck, like the morning, I don't know what the energy was. It just wasn't one of my best days, admittedly. And and a little bit of frustration with, because sometimes I come in there and I'm excited, I'm ready to go, and the only energy and vibe I get is just I don't want to be here, I don't feel like it, or I'm not prepared, or I just only want to raise questions around excuses, and sometimes it's just such a letdown, because we're reading blood in my eye, and we're talking about Psy War, my sociology class. Sometimes I come in there, I'm ready to go, I get, and I'm trying to get my energy up. So by my third class, I'm sitting there and I'm doing my normal greetings and trying to elicit something. And what I'll often try to do is invite students to say just anything that's on your mind. Just if it's not related to the homework and you don't want to dive right in, what's going on in your life? What's going on in the world? And I have enough of an ego to think that whatever they bring up, I can relate it back to the class. I can always bring whatever it is. I can find a way. George Jackson can find a way to connect. And I'm sitting there, and we're starting to get a little bit of energy. And this student, one key moment was this student. So, and in this moment, I was seated. And this is another telltale of my age, because for years I refused 4 or 5 classes. It didn't matter. I'm standing, I'm energy all day. But this time I was sitting down, and so there's this little bit of a gap between where I'm sitting and the students in their seats. And this student comes in kind of, 10, 11 minutes late, clearly late. And he comes in, headphones on, because I could see them in the corner, but his hoodie was on. Hoodie, headphones, and walks right in front of me, in between me and the class, and goes to his seat. And I said, I was like, nah. So I made, as they say in soccer commentary, I made a meal of it. I said, I started trying to make a little joke about it. Like, so that's what we doing now. I was like, come on, my man, like my guy, I'm working here. I'm doing the best I can. And his thing, and his response is, my car, I have car trouble. And I was like, my car broke down last week, but never would I walk in front of the professor. Never would I come in this late and walk in front. And he's rolling his eye. He's giving, he's not feeling it. And I'm like, I'm trying, but I was like, that's crazy rude. I was like, I just wouldn't do that. Why would you do that? I said, and then almost a minute later, a young woman walks in, that much more late, but because he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I was like, walk around, come in the other door, come around. But I was like, because I made a joke. I said, this is why I want to go back to the old days where we used to be able to lock the door, which was really never in my teaching experience. But it was just always, in fact, when I first got hired, there was some discussion of faculty doing that. And I never really liked that. But I was just like making a joke of it. Lock the door so you just can't come in and cut my flow. And I'm making jokes about my genius, and I'm dropping gems, and anyway. But she comes in and walks behind me and goes to her seat. And I said, that's what I'm talking about. And I made a little joke about her being late, and she walked in, but I said, but see how she did this? Anyway. So then another student says, Dr. Ball, you all right today? And I said, huh? No, you all right? And I said, of course. And I said, but I reject the question, because the question suggests that my justifiable and righteous defense of appropriate entrance into the class is really the result of me having a bad day, which was in part true, of course. I said, I said, that's not I said, the point isn't my day, Longer story short, this conversation leads to a question of good and bad days. And another student says, it came back to that cliche of, because I had flipped the question around and said, are you all having a good day? And one of my students said that cliche of, yeah, well, of course I am. I woke up. It's blessed. And I took that and turned that into my hook to get to George Jackson. And I said, that's an unacceptable standard. I said, that's it? Just waking up? That's it? And then someone else said, yeah, we should be grateful. And I said, grateful that I woke up this morning? I was like, what is this? What kind of standard is it that I should be glad to be awake? And they said, well, but you might not, other people might not have had the fortune of waking up this morning. And I said, but see, this is the problem that George and Black Studies have been encouraging us to address ourselves to, our imposed low standards. My favorite Bob Marley song has become "Want More." What you get is what you want, but do you want more? I said, what is this? I said, and I kind of became a little flamboyant with it and provocative and trying to get the energy up. And I was standing up and I was saying, what kind of nonsense standard is just waking up? I said, what if you're waking? I said, I said, this is what George is encouraging us to, and what Black Studies is, that the standard. So I did this thing that I thought was pretty cool. I said this, Black Studies, one of the core foundational purposes of Black Studies is to raise critical questions around what is Blackness, what is African Americanness, what is this, what is enslavement? And then they complicate it in its best versions by saying slavery was an interruption of a broader African and human experience. This whole question of challenging the imposed starting point for considering Black America with enslavement, which then allows for, with that as a standard, everything to be seen as some sort of progress and improvement. And I said, this is what George, in our first 30-page assignment, is saying is unacceptable. Malcolm made the whole point about if someone plunges a knife in your back 9 inches and pulls it out 5, they are not owed gratitude. And this went on for a while because students were really struggling with this. Students were really, and what I said at one point, I know some of this gratefulness is attached to spiritual beliefs and appreciation for the divine for giving you another day's breath. And I recognize that even though it's unspoken in many cases, and my atheism and its bias is playing a role in this as well, that I don't accept that. I don't. So one of my students said, well, what about, what about you have a nice day? It's like good weather. You're not grateful for that? And I said, grateful? I said, no. I said, I'm a materialist. I said, read George. I know a nice sunny day with 70 degrees and no humidity is a scientific expected, can be an expected scientific logical outcome of the physical universe. I can appreciate it. I can enjoy it, take advantage of it, make use of it as best I can, but grateful in some, no, because what if I woke up in this great, beautiful day in a jail cell or hooked up to some machine to keep me alive, or having to go to some whack-ass job, or what if bombs are dropping on me from a colonial oppressor in a nice day? Should I still be grateful? No, I was saying this is what George is advocating. Get our standards up. It's not just enough to wake up and to say, well, at least I'm not being bombed, or at least I'm not in a prison, or at least I have relative health and I'm not as bad off as somebody else. I'm like, what kind of standard is that? The standard should be something we don't even dream about anymore because our Fanonian dreams have been suppressed. So I don't know. I'll look at the chat in a minute. I don't know how you all feel about it, but I tried to make, like I said, a meal out of that, and I just wanted to bring that up today because I just wanted to encourage all of us, get our standards up. I do not accept that just because I woke up today and I have relative health compared to someone else, or I have something better than the worst of the human condition, that I should be grateful for that. No, I should be, if anything, mad that not everybody else has at least my bare minimum. which at this point is globally attainable, given, as I kept coming back to, it's now been reported that not only do we have 800 people in this country worth $6 trillion, but now the 0.1% have 54 trillion in private wealth, twice this country's GDP. No, how is this Afro pessimism? This is the pessimism. That's the pessimism is in that standard. The pessimism is in that standard of saying, well, at least I'm not that. So we'll see. We'll see how that reverberates going forward. Yeah, man, action. Although I disagree with those who say Afro-pessimism discourages action, but we're not going to go back to that today. We're not going to go back to that today. Yeah, I'm trying to do so. Finally, I will say that the class ended. It ended on an appropriate level of energy. I think we went off well, and it was great. It was I had a similar experience. My PhD counseling students use all kinds of counseling tactics to say such an approach wasn't providing a safe space, and I shared that I don't believe exists. Oh wow, yeah. Nobody was, to my knowledge, accusing me of not providing a safe space. So I hope that's they felt challenged that they couldn't express themselves. Oh no. No, I encouraged it. Express yourself, challenge. Speak up. That was my point. Like, you all don't want to speak. I will stand here. Look, I'll do it. I will get the energy up and I'll speak. Especially we talking about George. I'll get to George. We'll talk George. I'll ramble on and go, but how could you not? Like that's kind of my point. Like, I'll keep thinking, like, how can you not be more St. Andrew's newest video on religion is worth a watch, deeply related to what you just shared. All right, I will thank you for that. I will look for that. That's what's up. All right. Okay, so all right, just for folks, if you got to gauge your time or find if there's any competing streams or something. So we're going to get to some silliness here in a minute. A little bit of not serious silliness. We're going to talk a little bit about Sinners, Howard University. We got some buying power stuff to get to, some JohnHopeBryant, some silliness in there. And then I do want to end by talking about John Brown in a serious way. So my slow motion engagement with the GoodLordBird and some new to me research on John Brown. I want to talk and share a little bit about that. It was an unexpected detour that I didn't plan for, but it has been well, good is not the word I was looking for, but it's been great. So all right, and then we'll wrap up. So this was, I got sent a little bit of, actually I'm not, now I'm maybe not. Oh, thank you for the super chat every day. When I ask people how they're doing, they say surviving and do a nervous chuckle. I always say one day we're going to tell people we're thriving instead of surviving and truly mean it. I hope so. It's going to take some work to get there. But I hope so, for sure, because everybody is struggling on some level. So I just want to scroll through this a little bit because our homeboy Godfrey was back in some. So apparently one podcast. So this is Abba and Preach. I don't know if you all are familiar with them. I sometimes find their videos entertaining. I'm gonna give them credit for this, although I'm going to skip ahead to what they're being critical of, because apparently Godfrey has a podcast that is meant to engage pan-africanism in some way. And there was this recent discussion that was supposed to be about the LionKing and what is really being said in this, that, and the third. I don't know if I'm late to this, if you all have seen this, but I just was reminded again of somewhat was similar. What happens here is somewhat similar to what happened to me with Godfrey and his crew as it relates to buying power. But so let me just, and is it manosphere trash? I didn't quite get it. What little I've seen doesn't quite strike me as manosphere stuff, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't follow either of these platforms very closely, but this did catch my eye and I thought it was interesting. So let me just play.
Hey, what did I say?
You said nothing.
That's Zimbabwe.
I missed it. So they're talking about the song from the
I've
Lion
watched
King.
the Lion King.
Well, do it.
Sing it
Do
again.
it.
Okay. Oh no. Baba City Baba. City Gonya. Are you looking for something? I don't know. That's just.
Let me tell you something.
What did I say?
You
Go
said
ahead.
nothing.
That's Zimbabwe?
That's Zulu. That's
Zulu.
South African.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I can do it.
Do it.
So
Ready?
you sing it like Nansingonya Magiti Baba.
You were way off.
Ngonyama.
All right. What does it mean?
It means, look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
You're joking. That is not what that means. That is not what that means.
That's exactly what it means.
That's what it means. Look, there's a lion.
Oh my
God.
It's a
Look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
It's a lion.
That's crazy. That's funny.
So that's apparently, where it started. And then they heard from the South African writer of that song. And this is where I did, again, it's a much lower level. I'm not trying to equate the severity of this, but this is where I did kind of start to feel like that similar thread of, I get it. We all want to have some fun and it's jokes, but you're playing with something that I'm kind of serious about and I know about. And when I try to reach out to you to talk about it, it turns into some clown stuff, or we just ignore you. So I just move it ahead here
A little bit after I saw the first clip.
So good morning, world. I'm on tour with my friend Hans Zimmer. I'm waking up to the reality that there's an idiot.
Pause.
That was funny. They make fun of it. They have a little bit of fun with that. All right.
To engage him. There is the idea that being a comedian means you get away with everything. Not necessarily so. I'm a huge fan of comedy.
Yo, pause. Can you put us on the set of Flagrant?
It's important to mention where he's from, just so it is clear that he's intentionally misusing the global platform of going viral, intentionally disrespectful and dismissing even my explanation to him of the context of Nansi Ngonyama, which is a cultural heritage and royal statement we made for years in honoring and welcoming a king. I wrote, performed, and produced Nansi Ngonyama.
He's not nobody.
All right. So my question was, and I don't think this was, I don't remember this being raised by anybody in this video, but my initial problem was, yeah, okay, I get it. You want to defend your art and it's the depth of its meaning from these comedians on a platform being silly with it. But one, I admit you're performing with Hans Zimmer, so I'm already like, what are we doing? But then the other thing is, of course, you wrote the song for Disney. Is that not what is happening here? Or you sold it to Disney or gave it to Disney for the film? So, how then does that not devalue the cultural depth and meaning and importance and history of what you've written if you've just given it to the Lion King? I mean, it's like, I don't know. I feel like that's a major contradiction in and of itself. But
for people to be sucked into distortions, misfacts, and untruths. So in a nutshell, this young man has gone viral and for some reason believes his entire career is going to live on the basis of him continuing this lie, this distortion. Nancy Gonyama in a nutshell. All hail the king. Bow in the presence of the royal family. It is a metaphor written by myself in Zulu and Xhosa, South African cultural and heritage, language and norms, and that's who I am. We inspired the world well over 30 years with this work because its profound meaning is understood by South Africans and is understood by.
I disagree with that. To the extent you've inspired the world with the song is because it was attached to a Disney product that was imposed on the world. And and part of the problem is that the jokes being made about the song or the ignorance being purported about the song is in part the result of it being attached to an imperialist Disney product and not being conveyed in some meaningful, substantive Pan-African way to convey the depth and the seriousness of what is meant to. On the one hand, I get it. They shouldn't be just making fun of it and and misleading their audience to the extent they did. If they don't come back and explain later that this was a joke and this is what it really means, and I don't think they did, then yeah, they should be criticized for that. But I'm not getting that this is some meaningful, powerful African expression that has been disrespected by comedians when you gave it to Disney.
Anyone with common sense.
And then, yeah, I think I saw that too. Like, by the way, that's a good point. I have to agree with Paul on this too. Like, I'm not down with any of the monarchies.
But when an idiot finds an angle, finds an opportunity to go viral and be consistent with it and mislead, especially the African American community through the platform that he used, especially.
What impact does the Lion King have on the African American community as it relates to understanding the diaspora and African culture? Like that, that to me is far more distortion than what Godfrey and his crew did.
The world and the African diaspora insulting and spitting on the heritage of African kings, African culture.
Okay.
Of course, in many of my work.
All right, so you can check out Aberrant Preach for their thoughts on it. Where it ends is Godfrey apparently respond. They have some back and forth on Twitter where Godfrey basically says that it's just comedy. We should be allowed to be comedians. And then the brother says, no, it's more, it means more than that. You should be more respectful. And then, so I'm just adding my little 2 cents that it seems unfair to me that once you give your work to Disney, that you would be critical of how it's misinterpreted or made fun of or anything like that. But we love the Lion King. No, I get it. I get it. It missed me, but I get it. I just, yeah, that's where I'm at with it. Did he not spit on that culture by selling it? That's more where I am. So I just find it, this is a little bit of and I should have saved that drop from the Greg Carr video, the Martin. This is the pot, call it the kettle pot, kettle black pot type thing. Yeah. All right. So there we go. We addressed that there. Let me see what is. All right, you know what? I'm going to beg your forgiveness and let me pull something up here. Please like, share, subscribe, put this into your socials, drop a comment in a such and such in a what you watch and whatever you like. I'm going to take a quick break. I will be right back, and I'm going to leave you with this to ponder as sometimes they say, as your moment of zen. All right, apologies, and that is blasphemous, no doubt. No shout out to Bam. That was a shameful display. Shameful display. Oh, wait, no, I didn't mean to do that. All right. All right, let's move on here to the next. So I was sent this on Twitter, and I'm glad for it. I definitely put the link to this article in the show description already. But I wanted to, talk about it. Sinners offers a false vision of empowerment by TouréFReed in Current Affairs. Now, there's a couple things that I really appreciate about this review and this critique, and then there are a couple things that caused me a little bit of pause or concern, and I'll definitely invite your thoughts on it to help me out with it. For instance, right out of the gate, Professor Reed, an African-American professor of African-American history, which I will note, by the way, there's some conflict around this in some circles, is not the same as Black studies. And I might bring this up in my own classes around that there's even, some, tension, sometimes even beef between historians of African America and Black studies as a field. But I just note as we start this that I just note that. And then yeah, exactly. Out the gate, I was like, wait a minute. David Simon's brilliant television drama, The Wire? And I said, uh-oh. And honestly, I said, I'm probably this is gonna turn into a hate read. That's where I was when I highlighted that. I was like, calling The Wire brilliant to me is a red flag. But I admit there's a couple things in here that I appreciate it. I did not appreciate this, referring to Coogler's Black Panther films and Sinners combined moving tales of racial struggles with thrilling visions for Black liberation, unless it's sort of said tongue-in-cheek or taken ironically or sarcastically to be saying the thrilling visions are just that, thrilling visions but not much substance. So maybe, but what was being said here? Now I don't. Oh, right. The brothers confident talking about Smoke and Stack, and this was somewhat. This is where, because I even made a note in here after reading and not seeing my name, I started thinking for a second: am I being referenced here without attribution? I'm probably doing too much with that, but there was some overlap in our arguments here in terms of the critique of the film. Because remember, I centered most of my criticism of Sinners around, well, eventually two things. One, that we're meant to see as protagonists gangsters, which is not necessarily a problem for me, but entrepreneurs who only come up with a temporary entrepreneurial solution. And then if you attach that to the narrative around Coogler and the film itself, I think it all combines into this whole Black capitalist, entrepreneurial, promotional, individualist thing. TouréFReed does, or rather Reed, Professor Reed does a little bit more in writing, I think quite well, and explaining his version of this than I did with mine, but there's some overlap. Anyway, he writes, the brothers' confidence in their business model is reflected in the wages they pay. Indeed, Smoke and Stack don't just offer their employees a fair wage. The twins nudge prospective hires to demand pay commensurate with their worth. For example, Smoke playfully encourages a girl who is briefly in his employ to negotiate a wage twice that of his initial offer. The twins adopt a similar approach when recruiting bluesman Delta Slim and bouncer Cornbread to work at the club. Far from revealing any hints of antagonism, Smoke and Stack's bizarro world approach to wage negotiations is wed to their transparent desire to do right by Black people. Encouraging their patrons and employees to embrace their worth is at the heart of this project. I rephrase that more critically to say this promotion of a discussion of their worth or doing right by Black people solely through an entrepreneurial endeavor that, as this article ends up talking about, cannot succeed, is part of the mythology being promoted here, as opposed to the second part that I've evolved to in my critique of Sinners, which I want to come to more fully at some point, is that great review, never mind the book itself, from Eugene Puryear of almost a decade ago, of Robin Kelly's Hammer and Hoe, which talks about this similar time period, similar location, but from the perspective of radical Black labor, socialist, communist rebelliousness, and not from this mythological tale of gangsters and businessmen. Some more comparisons to the vampire genre. And then he writes here, in real life, Black businesses were not destroyed by Nosferatu. They were destroyed by racial violence, discriminatory banking practices, undercapitalization, and reliance on consumer base that had little disposable income. This is again where I felt an overlap with this critique of the film, that instead of it's more of the Black Wall Street thing, the mythology around the only thing stopping us has been racist vigilantism, and not the more powerful, ultimately, public policy capture and mobilization by the ruling elite through discriminatory banking practices, undercapitalization, and then ultimately, in terms of Black businesses, targeting a Black consumer base that don't have any money. I like some of this discussion around catharsis as master's tool, personal empowerment ideology married to Black. So this is what, so this article, it's clear, and I'll show you at the end, which I should have, it's predictable. This article has some problems with Black nationalism. It has some problems with African-centered approaches, and you can sort of see it by the swipe at everything from Farrakhan to Dr. Umar, and that's supposed to be the description of Black nationalism. So that's sort of the range that Black nationalism is considered, and that's obviously ultimately revealing about the politics of the author. But okay. This is why Ye, formerly Kanye West, was triggered a wave of outrage in 2018 when he tweeted that 400 years of slavery was a choice born out of mental slavery. One might be disposed to dismiss West's assertions from way back when as the idiosyncratic ravings of a madman. However, his comments harmonized with statements I hear from Black undergraduates every year. But you hear that from Black undergraduates every year, in part because of the mythologies promoted in films like Sinners and more broadly, and in academic environments, including HBCUs with powerful business schools and STEM funding, that argues constantly this quiet, sometimes loud, implicit theme of, if we just get our business together, if we just stop crab barreling one another, we really don't have the oppressive barriers that many silly radicals like to claim. And I think that in our different ways, this article somewhat addresses that. I would just prefer it to be said, obviously, the way I said it, but maybe in a better written way. But anyway. Wow. But like the fallen hip-hop star, many Black students insist that slaves and then sharecroppers' superior numbers in the South's rice, cotton, and cane growing districts equipped them to break the shackles of bondage and debt peonage. As the story goes, feelings of inferiority nurtured by white supremacy prevented Blacks from liberating themselves or even marshaling resources as other groups allegedly have. Ding message, that sounds very familiar to the buying power arguments. Most students reassess such views when we examine the Stono Rebellion, 1739, Nat Turner, 1831, the roughly 200,000 Black men who fought for the Union Army. Again, another red flag for me, because I do not equate and do not accept, even if others do, even if it's in some cases more historically accurate, any connection between Stono, Nat Turner, and fighting for the Union Army. I don't even like to consider what Harriet Tubman did, underground railroading, and eventually with the Union Army. I think these are two distinct, separate choices being made at certain contexts for certain reasons, and I don't see them necessarily as a continuum, and maybe more as an ultimate dissipation of that initial impetus to struggle. So I marked this as another sort of red flag as I was reading this. Again, as I'm going back and forth with some agreement, some overlap in agreement, and then back to some clear ideological differences with the author here. But anyway, so I just wanted to throw. By the way, this is going to come up in a moment when I get to the John Brown part of today's show. But so I've just make that point. The presumption that Blacks were complicit in their own oppression is partly owed to the fact that few seem to appreciate the power dynamics that check slaves and sharecroppers' revolutionary potential. Informed by mass media as well as popular folk histories, Americans tend to see plantations as prisons rather than sites of business, slaves as inmates punished for their Blackness instead of highly exploitable, rightless workers, and Jim Crow as a system of racial domination rather than brutal regimes in which white elites nullified the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to secure a deep pool of tractable labor. I think I like this argument, and I'm happy to be checked and corrected, especially when we see where I think where this author is more situated. But I like this part. I like adding the material element to the discussion. At least, again, I don't want to do what this author and others would prefer, to completely ignore the African-centered nationalist understandings and readings of these histories, but I do wish that they would also incorporate this into their analyses as well, because I do see this playing out to a certain extent in my own classes, where students, I think, have to be at times drawn out of an encouraged belief that there's something wrong with us, and that's why we've been enslaved and we didn't rebel, or we didn't rebel successfully, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that, or we haven't circulated our dollar and started businesses, blah, 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 blah. Because there's this material understanding, as he says here, as plantations as prisons. And instead of, I'm sorry, we see plantations as prisons rather than sites of business. I might add, maybe separately, especially after Orasami Burton's book, that we see prisons and plantations as sites of business, psychological warfare, counterinsurgency, and beyond. But nonetheless, I like this point. Instead of seeing the enslaved as merely or only through the lens of inmates punished for their blackness, that the highly exploitable rightless workers part be added to it. But again, what I fear is that too much will be done in that direction to ignore what I still do think are important issues of culture and discussions of how race is then redefined and what that means in terms of what is for us a Black Studies project of redefinition. But anyway, as historian Barbara Fields has quipped, the fundamental problem is that too many Americans imagine the point of slavery and Jim Crow was the production of white supremacy rather than cotton and the wealth it generated for planters and capitalists. As myself an internal colonialist, if I may put it that way, I see them as simultaneous and coexistent and equally parallelingly necessary parts of the process. That is, the production of wealth and capital through enslavement and colonization requires and also produces the white supremacy that runs parallel as a necessary component. So capitalism, he says here, may have been the engine driving slavery and then Jim Crow, but race oiled the machine by nurturing group identities that buttressed and legitimated the rightness of the hierarchies baked into the so-called free enterprise system. And yet Smoke's efficient single-handed defeat of Hogwood, that is the heavy-set white Klan dude who sells them the barn initially, and then the Klan washes away the very reality via a depiction of what could have been had Blacks known their power. To be sure, Hogwood and the Klan's place in sinners reminds us of the vulnerabilities and restraints Jim Crow imposed upon Blacks in the South. Black men who stood up to whites risked the retribution of the mob with no hope to reprieve from a state that denied African Americans its protections. And yet it's Smoke's efficient single-handed defeat of Hogwood and the Klan washes away this very reality via depiction of what could have been had Blacks known their power. And I get that too. This idea that the cathartic killing of all these whites is meant for the moviegoer to mask all that was actually going on in that time and today, for that matter, and then encourages this idea that if we knew our power, we could do this again today. And then who doesn't entrepreneurship empower? The current enthusiasm for Black entrepreneurship as a vehicle for racial justice might give the impression of novelty. However, entrepreneurial uplift dates back to the late 19th century. And this is where I was like, look, where's the link at? Where's the link at to your boy? Not one link to your boy. If the cast of players has changed over the subsequent decades, the base premise has not. Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League, Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam, and Floyd McKissick's Black Power-informed vision of Black capitalism, that Soul City, which I've covered as well, each identified the promotion of Black business as essential to building racial self-reliance, Black pride, and collective wealth. Its enduring appeal notwithstanding, every iteration of Black business-driven civil rights has faced the same fundamental problem. Entrepreneurial uplift necessarily conflates the aspirations of individual business owners with the collective ambitions of the race. Where is the link to your boy? the one part he leaves out of this quick summary is that this is, again, and I think it's maybe the most important part, is that this is not, even if you read it more closely than I'm treating it right now in this video, which I encourage you to do, and it's linked in the show description, I think you'll see that this is being presented as almost as if this occurred naturally. Again, in a way, almost in a way that Reed is critiquing the washing away of the complicated nuances, nuanced array of power through the on-screen killings of the Klan and the racists and sinners. It's almost feels like he's doing the same thing here in washing away all the nuanced power that presents this narrative as the only narrative, that is Black capitalism and entrepreneurialism. It didn't just, the conflation he's describing didn't just happen. And again, as we've discussed here in a number of iterations and on Black Liberation Media as well, recent studies by the Brookings Institution report, for example, that only 4% of Black-owned businesses are classified as employer firms, which is to say that they have few employees, or which is to say they have employees. So only 4% have employees. The rest, more than 95%, are sole proprietorships, many of which are likely misclassified as workers. That is, you work for yourself and are classified also as a worker. According to Brookings, Black-owned employer firms create just about 10 jobs on average, while more than 70% of Black employer firms employ 9 or fewer workers. For comparison, non-Black employer firms employ an average of 23 workers. Brookings affirms the contention that Black employers are more likely than non-Black employers to hire African Americans. The oft overlooked downside, however, is that the Black employer firms repeatedly pay their workers an average of about $20,000 less per year than non-Black owned employer firms. Stack's mid-film confession that the juke joint is underwater underlines the problem with the twins' business model. Solvency and the logic of capitalism insist that employers receive a much larger share of the business's material rewards than employees. Indeed, the twins' willingness to accept sharecroppers' wooden nickels would have been their undoing had Remnick and the Klan never showed up. And this is another way of putting the point I've been trying to make. If yes, the violence of whites is horrible, but that's not ultimately why Black businesses and Black Wall Streets, et cetera, don't, quote unquote, succeed. We've covered this point here as well. And he cites the work of these researchers whose work I've not read, but their conclusions we've read in others' works. First, about 3/4 of the racial wealth gap is between the richest 10% of whites and the richest 10% of Blacks. Second, the richest 10% of Blacks and whites respectively possess about 60% and 70% of each group's wealth. And third, because income and employment are the principal sources of wealth for the majority of Americans, the 50-year decline in real wages accounts for most of the racial wealth disparities. Now, what he leaves out in this is that the obvious points, and maybe that's why he doesn't think they're necessary to include, but I think it's important given the context of what is being argued here, that the wealth owned by whites may be the same, may be held in the same richest 10% of the white community, but that total is far more than what is owned in the relatively same percentage of Black owned ownership of wealth. I hope that made sense. That yes, within each community, 10% have roughly 60% to 70% of the group's wealth, but within the white community, that percentage is far higher than in the Black community. Ultimately, what is being pointed to here is that most of the wealth divide is among the bottom rungs. I'm sorry, among the top rungs of each community. That is that the racial wealth gap that we often discuss and hear about doesn't really exist, is the argument here, among Black and white regular working people. Most of the difference is in between that top 10% with 60% of each group's wealth. Then that 10%, noting that gap, call out the racial wealth gap as a major problem, and then that's used to deny our recognition that what is really at play here is something beyond simply a racial wealth divide, and is one that goes throughout the capitalist system, exploiting and oppressing and suppressing the wages and wealth and potential of all communities. Again, I hope. Sinners, a tale, he concludes, indeed, this is a story of sinners, a tale of loss centered on a Black-owned business's unfulfilled promise of generating wealth for the Black community. All right. There's obviously more here. In a post-Black Panther interview about racial identity, Kugler claimed his childhood in the Bay Area was marked by pain he attributes to his ignorance of African ancestry. He laments that he was taught that African Americans have a bastardized culture because they had been stripped of the things that had made them African. Kugler saw an opportunity to heal his childhood wounds when Marvel hired him to write Black Panther. He would ultimately convince the studio to finance a research trip to South Africa, where he was eventually invited to participate in a ritual that was purportedly thousands of years old. Actually, I think I only meant to highlight that because I thought it was, on the one hand, it's dope that he wants to connect with his African diaspora. It's just unfortunate that that tendency among us is reduced to what it becomes in his films, which is an anti-diaspora, anti-Pan-African, pro-Wakandan fantasy aligned with the colonial ruling powers. Despite him saying that they remained essentially African despite their separation from the continent. So this is where, okay, so I'm gonna move ahead. This is taking longer than I thought. I didn't realize, but essentially what ends up happening here is that while I might like, and some of us might appreciate that affinity for diaspora and Pan-Africanism, what ends up happening here is that something that reminded me of grad school, this critique of and discussion rather of cultural pluralism and what was often described as the essentialism of the African-centered world, that by essentializing different cultures between European, Asian, African, etc., we lose sight of the commonality of the human experience and so on and so forth. And I would probably just argue that the culture produced, given the material conditions of various communities over millennia in different parts of the world, produced different worldviews that encouraged different approaches to the environment and other forms of humanity and society that have led us to where we are today. But the goal here is that this being written by, and I agree that escapism is not salvation, and that this film encourages escapism. But the tell here for me, admittedly, and this is a bias, I'm open to being criticized for it, is that when you say that you're a contributor to Jacobin after promoting a form of materialism that is certainly not revolutionary, while condemning the cultural, or promoting a cultural pluralism and condemning essentialism and nationalism, all to say that you contribute to Jacobin, makes me think, I need to be more critical of where I find myself agreeing with what is said in this article, and just acknowledge these as overlaps and not so-called political affinity, if that makes sense. But I do agree largely, with some of the points being made here about the promotion of entrepreneurialism, the absence of nuance around power, and catharsis not being a solution, escapism not being a solution, but then the Jacobin thing kind of, Thank you for the super chat. They be dodging your work like Prime Floyd Mayweather. Honestly, look, I'm joking. I honestly don't know. I don't want to do too much with it. That obviously I'm in my own head, and and obviously, so on the one hand, there are obvious examples where people go out of their way and even to acknowledge that they're avoiding my work or whatever, ignoring my work. But I don't want to overdo it to think that I've produced this level of work that is insurmountable and unavoidable either. So I don't, I don't want to do too much. And again, he's a Jacobin writer, so it's very possible that he would not have come across my work and or would have been predisposed not to give it attention. But I don't want to do too much. But again, thanks for the super chat. But I did think that I was looking for the link. I was like, well, who? I will say increasingly, because my focus has and this ongoing project I'm in slow motion working on and all this chapter that's actually, I'm wondering where the updates are. But it's kind of, I don't know if it's that, what is that, what do they call it? When you start focusing on something, you start to think you're seeing it everywhere. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm finding all these discussions of Black capitalism and entrepreneurialism that I didn't see a few years ago. But I don't know if sometimes, I want to think it's because of me. But I think it's largely that I'm just seeing what I'm looking for. But anyway, salute to Twitter for sending me that article. I did enjoy it, even where we end up likely disagreeing, and there it is. Now, linked in the show description is my Not a Different World project, HBCU's Not a Different World project. So if you are an HBCU student or have been, or a parent of, or faculty, staff, administrator at an HBCU, please do check that link in the show description and consider participating. Oh yeah, that's right. You know what? That's right. That's Adolph Reed's son, and Adolph does know who I am. So you know what? I didn't even put that together until just now. That's deep. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Maybe. Okay. Maybe. So the conspiracy back on then. You and Godfrey butted heads over the myth of propaganda, Black buying power. So sort of. So and I've done a couple videos on this if you want to really, if you want more. But so a couple of months ago, and it started with the Lord Jamar flat Earth thing that they encountered, and I had done a video in response to them making fun of Lord Jamar, and I made the point, which I still think is right, that financial literacy is to economics what flat Earth is to science. And Godfrey's co-host and homeboy on the other's podcast, Dante, reached out. So it wasn't Godfrey directly; it was his homeboy Dante reached out, and we initially spoke about that, but then. And we were in agreement. We had a nice conversation about Lord Jamar and flat Earth. But then when I tried to say, okay, so we're in agreement, Lord Jamar is tripping, all of that. But then when I said, but by the way, you all, you keep doing this, a couple times you do this buying power thing. If we're in contact and texting and getting on the phone, to talk about this, let me, so I said, Dante, let me, and then I just stopped hearing. And that's usually, that seems to be the pattern. So so there wasn't any beef, but I was in touch. I told them. And then even after that, they kept doing it with the Black Amazon thing they did, and the Black, the way they talk about the comedy scene and the industry. So I was just like, I think you just missed, so it's just, that's it. And respect back. Absolutely. All right. So, but anyway, but speaking of HBCUs, I'm late to this story, but I did see this and was disappointed that Howard University bans anthem kneeling for athletes. Student athletes must now stand for the anthem, or they must go into the locker or stay in the locker room. But there's no more coming out on the field and kneeling and doing all that other kind of stuff. And according to their newspaper, the athletics department issued new protocols after a recent game against, I believe, one of the military academies, wasn't it? Something like that. Yeah, because this happened against the Army. Howard University has changed its pregame protocol for student athletes, ending a 6-year tradition where members of the women's basketball team knelt during the national anthem to protest social justice. Under the new rule, athletes must either stand for the anthem or remain in the locker room while it is played. The policy shift follows internal discussions within the university's athletic department after the protest resurfaced during a December game against Army. Howard's vice president of athletics, Kerry Davis, said the goal is to balance freedom of expression with mutual respect for all communities. But the change has sparked conversation among students and athletes about protest, tradition, and what it means at HBCU with a long legacy of activism. They really need to stop saying this. Morgan does the same thing. This long legacy of activism is not long. And the activism that they point to, especially at Howard, remember, the administration and a lot of the parents and a lot of, were not in league with the protests that those students were engaging in. And again, those protests were being encouraged and almost demanded by a broader civil rights, Black Power movement struggle. So, and then, but to turn that into a legacy of activism is, I think, misleading. We don't see that. It doesn't mean that there are not activist students. It doesn't mean that there are not students involved, this, that, and the third. But as a student body, as an institution, I think it's overdoing it. And then if we move beyond Howard to the broader HBCU constellation, I think it even decreases. Certainly at Morgan compared to Howard, I think it's night and day in terms of overt political activity. And I've talked a little bit about why I think that is, but I also think that this misunderstands what HBCUs are. And why, so now this one student is, I think, confused about HBCUs, but not confused politically. Where he says, we would never believe that coming to Howard, the biggest HBCU in the world, the Mecca, would basically be forced to bow down to the white oppressive system, says Wise Daly, a junior goalkeeper from Trinidad. Now, unfortunately, he had a number of comments in the paper that were right on and along these lines, but the reality is this is exactly what HBCUs are designed and intended to produce. These are not Black institutions designed to produce Black, critically thinking, radical acting people. So it makes perfect sense that at the Mecca, the biggest HBCU in the world, that one funded, maybe not exclusively, but primarily by federal government grants, by military and corporate investment, as has always been the case, named after a slave-owning, wait a minute. I know Howard County, where I live, is not the same Howard. My Howard is named after a slave owner for sure. Was General Howard? I don't think he was. He may not have been an owner of anyone, but he was certainly not some radical abolitionist. But a white named Black university. These are not places that are going to produce these. They're not a different world. That's my point. They are meant to bring Black people into this world in an acceptable form. One way of putting it, boule factories. But yeah, So my 2 cents to Howard students and anyone else, stay in the locker room. I wouldn't want to publicly advocate that they do it anyway, but if staying in the locker room is an option, I would advocate that. I've admitted even recently my own, I've had to make some adjustments given some, personal and security issues that I've become less willing to stay seated in stadium environments, depending who I'm with. During the anthem, and have just chosen the locker room option relative to just being a fan or whatever in the audience. Just don't take my seat until after the anthem. But the bigger reality is I'm not in that situation very often. So, but okay, just thought that was. Now, so I did apologize to this person because they had actually sent this to me a year ago, and I didn't see it until they sent me something the other day, which I'll show you in a minute. But I did think it was worth revisiting even a year later, because I get the impression that this is still going on, maybe even in this place. But
if you can't hold it for 24 hours, you don't have no discipline. They can take anything from us. We are Black folk. I believe it's the 12th wealthiest economy in the world. Our buying power is 12th out of all of these nations. All the bank we use on discretionary income to buy designer stuff we can't spell for people who won't let us work with them. But here's what I would like for us to do. Somebody say February 28th. Say black buyout for 24 hours. Don't buy nothing. Don't buy no gas. Don't buy no food. Don't use your debit card. Don't use your credit card. Don't buy no food out. Eat you some ramen noodles. Something. If you can't hold it for 24 hours, you don't have no discipline. They can take anything from us. Eat in your house. Hear me. Got medication, got stuff like that. That's one thing. Don't buy nothing on the 28th. I ain't asking you to march. I ain't asking you to get bit by no dogs. I ain't asking you to get hit in the head. I ain't asking you to have Bloody Sunday. I'm asking for you to join your dog in discipline so that we can say together, this is crazy. Why? Because they don't understand speeches. They understand dollars. They understand that when you say, oh, I don't have to give you my money. I've decided to give you my money.
So what struck me the most about that is the direct link he makes to one of the points that I've been arguing for a minute now, that the goal of a focus on Black entrepreneurialism, et cetera, is to get Black people out of radical political activism. He's literally saying, I'm not asking you, we could debate the examples he's using as to whether we would define them as radical activism, or how we would define them, but out of respect to them, at minimum, he's saying you don't even need to do this. You don't even need to get your head cracked open at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You don't need to get no dogs or or anything else. You don't, no activism, no politics. Just one day, don't shop, and then we've only seen that one clip, so I'm sure he lays this all out in the breadth of his sermon. But no demands attached, no specific. So what is supposed to happen at the end of that 24-hour period? Magically, what is the goal? So anyway, a year late, but I was also sent by this same person something a little more recent, which is doing the same thing. Black Wall Street. Black Americans hold an estimated 1.6 trillion in buying power. When we intentionally support Black-owned businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if I go to the Black, well, I'll show you. Share this tab instead. When you go to their website, This is, again, part of the problem that I keep pointing to. What are the options being produced by Black owners for purchase? Clothing, shoes, makeup, beauty products, prints, fitness and gyms, no products. Vitamins, soursop leaves tea. Headphones and speakers, nope. And again, I'm not trying to diss anybody. What I'm trying to show is that there are not enough Black businesses serving the needs and the wants and the interests of Black consumers. And there's not enough money among Black consumers to float and support all of those businesses. So again, we shouldn't be saying, again, when possible, buy Black, fine. I'm all for it. But the point should be, we are all in need and in want of things. We are all producing this wealth that 0.1% now have at $54 trillion. I don't think we need another business. I do not think we need another single proprietor, Black-owned business selling us candles or lotion or tea. What we need is the wealth produced from all of the exchange and purchasing of all of those items and more to be distributed in ways that don't allow for the kind of inequality that we see. And until we move away from what the pastor was calling for and towards political activism, public policy, disruption, we are giving ourselves over to the FinancialLiteracists. And I'm going to use that to segue into what I saw in what I thought was a funny critique of the Joe Rogan comedy sphere. And there's this overlap into the white version of FinancialLiteracy with Gary V, the NFT guy. Do you all remember him? I don't know if you all remember him, but this is a discussion that's ultimately about him. I'm only going to show you this one quick clip between Joe Rogan and the comedian TimDillon. I don't co-sign anything about either one of these people. I do watch some of these channels that critique what's happening in their spaces because I find it entertaining, fun, relaxing, sometimes even informative. And in this case, I did think this was kind of funny. And as a segue to the next thing, I thought I would just show you this, because apparently, who knew whites have a problem with the FinancialLiteracists?
Taken down, which is what happened to TimDillon's original video. But that is some of the funniest shit I've ever seen from Tim.
I'm kidding, Gary. Gary, I love you. I'm inspired by you every day. It's all a bit.
It's a bit.
It's all a joke. I think it's great when you.
What happened with him?
Well, I have a joke about him. I have a joke. I made a little video about him because some of the things he tweets like kindness is delicious. Come on. What are we doing?
He puts out a little too much content.
But it's also like all my loser friends think they're going to be the CEOs of companies because this guy is telling them there's a business inside of everyone, and there's not.
They're like, okay, he's saying everyone can. That means me. I'm going to go for it, and then they make it.
And I appreciate him doing that, but I need to send the message that most people can't. But it's also there's no specific guidance with a lot of these guys, not only him, but he'll say things like, you could talk about it, or you could do it, but you better do both. And it's like, well, what's the it? Like he tweeted once, he goes, ideas are shit. It's all about execution. It's like, execute what? What are we going to do? I need help. My kids are sick. Execute what? Can you text me? Do I meet you somewhere? How do we start this? How do we build these businesses?
I just thought that was funny. This is in the context of a video about grifting in the comedians space, Joe Rogan in particular. and this Gary V character is back in the mix again. And I remember him from a couple of years ago promoting all the NFT nonsense. And I just thought it was funny. Like, he's doing the white version of what I'm about to show you again, that in this case, TimDillon, representing every man, every white man that is saying, you keep telling me to do this thing. What is the thing? What is the thing? And then here we go again with you know, our favorite back at it doing the black grift. So TimDillon is over there addressing the white grift, and here we have our boy back at it again.
Africans and Black Caribbeans and Black Americans are different. Black Africans and Black Caribbeans are closer, almost identical. They have high, and I'm generalizing now, but generalization is pretty accurate. They have high self-esteem and lower levels of confidence. Black Americans have higher levels of confidence and lower levels of self-esteem. Because
wait, somebody in the crowd said, "What's your data? What's the source?"
So slavery lasted here longer. It was turned into a business, and it was an intentional desire to destroy your spirit, because if they had this black man here coming here with all that build and all that brawn from, by the way, they say they went to Africa.
So slavery in the Caribbean and the Americas was shorter and less damaging. The colonization on the continent was shorter and less damaging than the enslavement here in the United States. Well, as we know, it was only about 5% of the enslaved African population that ended up here in the United States. So that would then mean 95% of the remaining diaspora are doing, by his definition, well, right? Because ain't no racism, ain't no colonialism, and the Africans and the Caribbeans are better than the Black Americans. They got the memo, as he said previously. So when we look outside of the Black America, we'll see 95% of the African diaspora chilling in this wonderful global economy.
Oh, we're dumb, we're stupid. Knock that off. 1500s was an agricultural age. The wealthiest gold in America, in the world, were cotton crops and sugar crops and tobacco crops, which are in areas which were very humid, very hot, and the soil was almost dead. Who could master dead soil? Africans. So they went halfway around the world to find the geniuses of the soil. They brought us halfway around the world because we could build wealth for them and income. But they didn't need this brother's attitude. They needed his body. So they separated from his family, so he had no hope. They abused his wife and held him down so he couldn't protect her until he gave up his self-esteem. Now he's just machinery. So now 400 years later, we never healed. So if I don't like me, I'm not going to like you. If I don't feel good about me, I'm not going to feel good about you. If I don't respect me, don't expect me to respect you. If I don't love me, I don't have a clue how to love you. And here's the big one. If I don't have a purpose in my life, I'm going to make your life a living hell. Whatever goes around.
So what is his purpose? Because, and I'm happy to be checked on this too. I'm not pretending to have done the deepest dive research, but how does Operation Hope make money? What is his particular duplicatable, scalable, repeatable, self-esteem, whatever he's advocating for that because again, all I understand Operation Hope to be is a conduit for white investment to extract whatever remaining money is in the Black community into white-owned investment, banking, real estate, etc., through his classes, links, connections, et cetera, and so forth. So what
comes around. So we have high confidence, Jerome, because we've competed and succeeded against all odds in the biggest economy on the planet.
I want to say again, please go back if you haven't. We should have like routine rewatchings of his appearance on Brokish, because you can see this is someone who is used to only talking to people who either already fully believe or who have no idea of what he's discussing. As soon as he's sitting down with someone with any level of competency, he falls completely apart and then leaves.
Planet. So we have high confidence because we're competent, but we have low self-esteem, which is why you have crab in the barrel.
No, you have crab in the barrel because obviously Africans have been as crabs put in a barrel. He wants to act like ain't no barrel and that we're not in it. And that's one of, if not the fundamental flaw.
Somebody's sitting there going, what is he talking about? My life? Why would anybody have anything with something positive to say right now? So if you got a problem with me, you need to check yourself. I don't even know you.
You don't know me, and I got a problem with you. And I check myself routinely. And in that self-checking, I realize that my problem with you is because you continuously misrepresent the realities of the Black economic condition and African history, and you self-promote as some solution provider, and all you are is a conduit for white money to extract and build more of itself through Black money.
So, as Quincy Jones once said, not 1 ounce of my self-esteem depends on your acceptance of me. So
again, and my acceptance or not of you, your self-esteem or lack thereof has zero to do with the condition of the community. Black people are not oppressed because Black people lack self-esteem. Black people are not poor because Black people lack financial literacy. You're ignoring the barrel of settler colonialism, capitalism, enslavement, anti-Blackness, white supremacy, et cetera, 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 et cetera. And I know, and some of you have been right to raise some questions with me about this, and shout out to Nick Estes at Red Nation. There are differences between internal, settler, and strict colonialism. I do conflate and use them all interchangeably, but, you know, but all of that's going on, and my man here is on his performance, and I do find it irritating.
It's okay if you don't like me. I like me. Now, Black African, y'all, come on now. We having church in here.
But we don't need church. We need materialist analysis.
Now, Black Africans and Caribbeans experience slavery lower for a shorter period of time, and they experience family structure and role modeling for a longer period of time. The mayor was Black. The governor was Black. The premier was Black. The dentist was Black. The barber was Black. The thief was Black. Everybody was Black. Together families. So they have higher self.
Another thing that's really clear is that, again, and I'm not the expert on this, but it's clear he's never read anything about life of African people on the continent or in the diaspora. This argument that suggests that only in Black America was the family somehow disturbed, and yet these African families were perfectly whole and thriving in the context of their experiences with colonization and enslavement is wildly absurd. It is also Daniel Moynihan-esque for him to make the argument again that Black people are poor because the family broke apart and Black people don't know how to have a family, which is again showing he has not read anything about Black American family life and history during, post enslavement. I know. My bad. I think we're going to end on a good note, though. It is taking longer than I thought, but I think we are going to end on a good note.
Esteem, but they have lower confidence because they didn't succeed in the market economy. It makes perfect sense.
Actually, while I'm reminded of that, Chidi Macha, I meant to say this privately, but since we just all out here in these streets, again, I would really want folks to go find your discussion on millennials are killing capitalism the other day, and then I'm gonna invite. I would like to invite you to pick something that you've written for us to discuss at some point. But I liked getting homework. So if you have something coming out or that you've already written and want to discuss, please let me know. Anyway.
So that's why when Black Africans or Caribbeans come here, within 2 or 3 years, they're killing it.
So again, as we've been pointing out for many, many, many years, and I should credit again Glenn Ford for putting me on to this research decades ago. Well, now it is decades ago. Goodness gracious. That again, all so-called legal immigrants who come to this country from anywhere else in the world, including the continent and the Caribbean, come from a standard of living better than the average Black American. So he's ignoring the class element in all of this and is acting like everybody just shows up and automatically does well. And as he says, hits the ground running, as if, again, he has never paid any attention to the conditions of those African and Caribbean families once here in the United States. And he's treating it as if they have, and others do this too, as if they have this automatically wildly distinct and unique experience in this country that Black Americans don't have. He again also ignores the overlap in all of these families. So is it then that if you've had a father or mother or grandparent who came from the Caribbean or the continent, that by the time we get to you, your Black Americanness is kicked in and ruined you? Or you've just been floated by those ancestors? Because at what point, again, at what point is the last African? I mentioned this a little while ago, and remember in the context of the linguistic discussions on my atheist debates channels, where they're talking about there was never a time where there was the last Latin speaker and the first French speaker or Spanish speaker or English speaker. So when is the last African? Is there a last African?
The Ethiopians in Washington, D.C., they're at the Park Hyatt parking the cars. Within a couple of days, they've hired the buddies to be valets. Within a few weeks, they're also the taxi drivers. Within a couple months, they put the money in for an Uber car. Now they got a Black car. Now they got 3 Black cars. Now they live together. Now they have their entire staff of the front.
Could he find one example of this? Even just one. This magical, I went from parking cars to owning 3 Black Ubers that other people drive. Is that what he's saying? Where does this happen? Because what he's trying to dig himself out of is the hole he put himself in initially by pointing out the fact that even these so-called superior immigrants who come over here are stuck and relegated in these low-rung jobs, these low-tier jobs. And that they don't turn that into some magical bootstrap fantasy of capitalism where they're then owning this, that, and the third. That's not what happens. And again, if he can ever provide any data, I would love to see it.
Of the lobby, they have the valets, they got the taxi, they got the Ubers, they're willing to rent you an apartment if you want one. I mean,
no, they're not. That's not true.
But that's because the hustle was the only ingredient that they missed, the opportunity. Black people, Black Americans are the role models for the world. but we've got a little bit confused because we think that's enough. We're also depressed. I think that 70% of Black Americans clinically undiagnosed depressed. And I can't prove
Yeah, like he did, like that was 3 things: clinically undiagnosed depressed. That's one statement. Again, is it based on anything? I don't know. And if it's true, it has nothing to do with what he's saying. It has to do with the material realities. And I think you can see here in his face, he knows he's lost. And he's struggling to recover here. You can see it.
Prove that number. I love number. I can't prove that one. Whenever I talk to somebody, our people in a real conversation.
Now, I talk to at least one Black clinical psychologist on a regular basis, a practicing, teaching, counseling clinical psychologist on a regular basis, and he reports something similar in the massive uptick in Black depression, self-harm, et cetera, and so forth. So the data exists. Now, the why it exists would probably make JohnHopeBryant fall apart and collapse, because it has everything to do with the colonialism and all the other stuff I was talking about that he wants to act like doesn't exist. But but he doesn't have to have any facts or data or anything related to anything he said today. And by the way, he's only acknowledging not having information on this one thing when he could have said that about every single thing he said.
Can I get an amen?
No.
So when we're having a real conversation, we just have to heal so we can deal. Now, if we can heal, which is real wealth, and heal ourselves and love ourselves, now we can have a relationship. Now, in a relationship, it's the only time where it should be multiplication and not math. So if in a relationship, if 2 + 2 does not equal 6, 8, or 10,
multiplication is math.
What are you doing? If you're not better together, what are you doing? When you go to the club tonight, what's tonight? Tonight's Saturday. When you go to the club tonight, what's tonight? Friday. Entrepreneurs, we work 18 hours a day to keep getting a job. We work 8.
All right, I'm just gonna enough. You're right. Enough, everybody. Enough. He's this whole thing of again the Daniel Moynihan thing. Find your partner at the club tonight and make sure your partner doesn't. I can do bad by myself, as the song used to say, or whatever. Right? It's exactly. He's talking crazy. That was actually longer than I thought as a clip. Sometimes I don't vet these clips fully. But okay, like, share, subscribe, everybody, please. Sudeep, what's up? I saw Sudeep in the chat. What's up, man? So everybody, we got the next installation coming up on the 19th of this month, next week, a week from today, of the Donut King discussion, Asian triangulation in an anti-Black world. And look at this thing here. This picture comes from an article linked in the show description of that video. And I'm interested to know, I meant to ask, I think I sent it to Sudeep. I'm interested to know what you think of that and the article that it comes from. But so join us next week for that. And there is a playlist for the Donut King project, so check that out as well. And if you've missed anything. And I agree, actually. That's a good point. I don't want to work 18 hours. Ugh. Right on. Yes, indeed. I'm excited for it too, Sudeep. I'm loving the project. So, yeah, it's something. Yeah, okay. All right, so it's been months since I watched a video that is itself years old. And I do check this channel out from time to time, May Muses, and as usual, we're not exactly on the same page, but I do enjoy a lot of her the content she produces, and I enjoyed this one too. And I just want to credit her for this, because I saw this video months ago, watched enough to see what it was going to do, then stopped it because it was about the TV series The Good Lord Bird. Yeah, thank you. I had to, I figured, let me, it's been overdue since I pulled it back out. So thank you. Exactly. Only 116 likes with 200 plus watching. What y'all doing? Hit the like button. Thank you, Cynical. Thank you. Goodness gracious. What are we doing? Clutch my pearls. So it was about the series The Good Lord Bird, which is on one of these channels. I actually didn't end up watching it because of a couple things, including that for all these subscription services I pay for, this was on one I don't pay for. And I was like, I kind of want to see Ethan Hawke do this thing with John Brown, but I was like, But what I did do is go and listen to the book that it's based on, James McBride's The Good Lord Bird, linked in the show description. Then I came back and watched her video, and the video is like 5 years old. I just did this a few weeks ago because for the last couple of months, actually, I've been listening to The Good Lord Bird and reading a number of things about John Brown on the side, and just kind of like, wow, like this is fascinating. A lot of stuff I never knew, never paid attention to, and all this other kind of stuff. But so I'm going to play this little clip from what she says about the series. And then I do want to talk a little bit about the book. And then I found a couple of things that I want to show you all and talk a little bit about. I made it, I made my notes about this. Okay, so my two statements about this. John Brown is a great standard relative to most whites, but he is still wedded to an old-fashioned form of Christianity where rules are constructed to be harsh and violently enforced. But by the end of this, I said, John Brown, I am more now convinced, also in conjunction with George Jackson, demonstrates what today is likely needed. Let me say that again. John Brown, I am more now convinced, also in conjunction with George Jackson, demonstrates what today is likely needed. Brash, direct, incontrovertible actions that also likely demand great sacrifice and that will force liberal non-actors into their roles of bourgeois mollifying and revolutionaries to further challenge them. All right, let me just play this section here, and then I'll come back to everything.
The most was Little Onion implying that slavery was a good time. And I've seen this argument online in defense of slavery. If someone had said that, I would assume, oh, you're a racist. It's sort of sacrilege. It's sort of...
Sorry, I messed this up. Sorry about that. All right. In James McBride's book, which I think is really well written, the story is fascinating. There's a number of things he does that I find confusing that she's talking about here. One of which is the main character of the book is not John Brown. So I was already skeptical and had to overcome some of that by the good writing and storytelling in the book. The main character in the book is Little Onion. Now, Little Onion is described as more fair-skinned than I think pictured in the thumbnail and in the series, but as a fair-skinned mulatto whose black father is killed in an early scene, and then John Brown, who was there, takes Little Onion as part of his evolving crew. Little Onion is, again, a fair-skinned mulatto who is a boy, but is always depicted and hides himself as a girl. All right? Little Onion is a fictional character. And maybe it should be Lil Onion, but it's Little Onion. But Lil Onion. So, right. Interesting. So the narrative device is the use of a light-skinned mulatto boy dressed up as a girl throughout the entire story, right up until the very, 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 very end. Little Onion often is often the voice through which we hear this, what she's talking about here, this version of slavery that really ain't so bad, as is depicted in the book. And then apparently in the series, Onion says repeatedly something to the effect, I never had a night of difficult, of difficult work. I never suffered for food, never experienced violence until I started running around with John Brown. Oh yeah, let me interrupt myself for this. Oh, Jared, One United Bank has now where you can get financial literacy and money management AI tips. So listen, yesterday, because she's in the leadership of NCBS, National Council for Black Studies, Dr. Melina Abdullah came to in the conferences being held this weekend in Baltimore and co-hosted by Morgan State's Black Studies program. And if you're wondering or interested, I'm not involved in or participating or invited to. But Dr. Abdullah reached out to me out of the blue and said, and I thought in a very interesting way, and said, do you have time for me to come by and for us to take a walk and talk? And I said to her, I said, wow, this is oddly great. I like taking walks. I don't recall ever being invited to take a walk with someone for the purposes of catching up and clearing the air. I appreciate it. One of the things she wanted to talk to me about is our previous few years ago, old now, public feud is too strong a word, but disagreement around her leadership in Black Lives Matter and their teaming up with One United Bank to marshal the buying power of Black America to help with one part of the project to raise money to bail, I think, women in particular, mothers out of jails, or just bail people out of jail, something like that. In my attempt to reach out to her publicly to criticize that project, there was some, I would describe, misinterpretation and poor communication, and my part included, and some confusion. So to her credit, and I appreciate this, she said, look, I'm going to be in town. Let's wrap. So we took a nice walk. I showed her Morgan State's campus, got our steps in, cleared the air, but we did conclude that we don't agree on this project. She has her reasons and her rationale and her logic and explanation for involving Black Lives Matter with One United Bank and the Black Bank buying power thing. I disagree, and we can, that's that. There's no drama, no hostility. Certainly don't advocate that people take, undue steps to extrapolate from that and to speculate on people's character and this, that, and the third. It's just, we just don't agree on the tactic or the idea or that. So anyway, so that's cool. So, but I'm not surprised that One United Bank is doing AI and all of that. No, it was a nice walk. It was not mafia. It was take a nice walk. All right. So now this is where we are. So this is where I just wanted to credit May with putting me on to this whole story and book, and then and have her summarize this one bit of an odd concern that I think to a certain extent we both share.
Blasphemy. Like, what are you saying? You saying slavery was a good time? You saying that you enjoyed having a massa? But like I said, I'm reading this book called The Renegade History of the United States, and he sort of goes into that argument as well, kind of explains it very clearly. I'm not saying I support it, but I understand what may have been in James McBride's mind when he was writing this book. That is probably the most out there idea of this whole show. But a piece of art that makes you think is kind of good art, isn't it? The Northern way of life was so bad that there was another rebellion against it after this. The labor movement was pushing back against the Northern way of life. That's how bad it was. And so for the North to come and try to impose their views on the whole country, I kind of understand. I understand why James McBride wanted to make this point. And I understand why that point was made in the renegade history of the United States. Do I necessarily agree with it? I can't say that I do. But from an 1850s perspective, I can understand why Little Onion would have something to say about it. Now, I'm living on the other side of the labor movement. So I'm thinking, of course, the Northern way of life was better. Of course, that's why he was trying to impose it on the whole country. But from the other side of the labor movement, you might be thinking, these people were working 16-hour days. These children were dying in the mills. This is not something you should be imposing on the whole country right now. So I get it. And that part really made me think. It was really brave of Ethan Hawke and James McBride to broach the subject of the good and bad of slavery at all.
All right. So the link to that whole video is in the show description. I encourage you to check it out. So this is where I kind of disagree with that last part, that it's not a brave choice in my estimation for, I think, AMC and McBride and his publication of this is like 30 years old. The book was in the 90s, I believe. Or 20 years old, and 30 years old. Yeah, 30. And I don't think it's a brave act on their part to choose this narrative device to tell the tale of John Brown. I think it makes sense for the goal of a New York Times bestseller, which the book was, of having of being picked up and having a series put on TV or a streaming service. I think it's a logical, if not conscious act to take, if not unconscious act to take, to get something published that you not that these sentiments and nuances and contradictions wouldn't have existed, but to have that be so central to me makes sense, because ultimately you're talking about a white man willing to kill other white men to free black people. So, and then having read more about John Brown these last few weeks and being reminded not only of how much white America is terrified of him, but in particular, and I'm going to come to this in a little bit, the white religious community is terrified of him. It makes sense that it would be difficult to bring him up at all, much less from the perspective of how bad slavery was and how good any effort to end it would be. That said, I do like that point. I like that there's some consideration. I don't know exactly how that book does it, and I don't know that I fully agree with how May approaches it, but I do like that there's some consideration for, I mean, the North wasn't so great either, and their Northern industrial capitalism wasn't so great either. And but sort of to the point that I started with in terms of standards, and to the point of what we want, I get the whole, in other words, I get the whole, I like that it shows us the it produces for us, or shows us, or the history. That's what I was, the breadth of the problems we struggle with today in terms of what our standards are and what people advocate, and how we end up with the JohnHopeBryants and the FinancialLiteracists and all of them, when there has always been this barrel of the United States into which we, the crabs, have been put, which causes all of these wild contradictions. And slavery would, of course, produce as many of them as anything else. So you have slavery in the South and industrial capitalism evolving in the North. None of that is good for anybody. So on some level, it is jumping from the frying pan into the fire, with the idea that because slavery is so bad and set as a standard for Black experience in this country, even dying in the mills, in the capitalist factories of the North, sounds better. And then that contradiction and that reality produces all of the Nat Turners and John Browns and Harriet Tubmans and JohnHopeBryants and Jared Balls and everybody else. But I'm not surprised that the book chose that and took that device. This also reminded me that in that FD signifier video about Tyler Perry, there was one thing that I disagreed with him on, where he talks about the whole controversy of black men having to wear dresses to have a career in Hollywood. And FD points out that white and other actors do the same thing, and there's a long tradition of drag and acting there. And my only point is that all of that context is by demand adjusted and changed when applied to black people, given that the experience of black people and race in this country is very distinct in particular. So it did occur to me that here we go again, where the black protagonist is in a dress the entire film or series and book. And though the author of the book is black, it makes sense that for this to get picked up by another medium, for the book to go become a bestseller and then to be picked up in another medium. I get it. Yeah, the disagreement was after I watched the whole video at Yipper, and not just that video, but a good amount of Mae Muse's content. She's a Christian. She's to my right politically. So there's just slight differences, not political enemies. We don't know each other, but I'm doing all of that. I'm just saying this. So, but once I watched the video, I disagree with her. And then his FD's video, if that's video meant too, after I watched that whole video, I still disagree with his point on, in other words, saying that black people shouldn't raise an eyebrow about black men in dresses as a thing, especially given chapter 5 of Tip of the Spear. You know what? I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna encourage FD Signifier to read Ori's entire book, but revisit chapter 5 and ask him to rethink that dress thing again. Because again, I'm not denying the tradition of drag, and I'm not even saying black men in a dress for me is a particular problem, but from the perspective of white man, as Dr. Burton puts it, and what white man's goal is. It's not enough for me that FD can say, well, white and Asian and other actors in this long history of drag have done the same thing. Cool. They have a very different relationship in history. So that would be, I've come around on the drag thing. I doubt it's a conspiracy, but I think white media does fetishize black gender play. So I think somewhere I'm somewhat, yeah, like I'm not saying drag or is itself a problem. I am saying it is politically used by a white supremacist society that has its own massive problems with gender and sexuality. But okay. But I'm way outside my lane there. So let me step back a little bit. So yeah, so I made a note here that in the book and in the series, apparently we get a view from those who we get a lot of reference to this, slavery wasn't that bad. And in the book, most of, in fact, now that I think about it, very little of the book depicts the life of the enslaved. And this is part of the point of my problem with this narrative device. Because on the one hand, you have this one enslaved person constantly saying, it's not so bad. And I'm struggling. My life got worse when I ran off with John Brown. And the only really discussion of the institution of slavery is in the criticism and the condemnation of it from John Brown himself in the book. But there's no real depiction or discussion, not much of the enslaved. A little bit around when there's that the quote unquote slave pen outside of the brothel that Onion is working in as a sort of assistant to the what's her name, the superstar prostitute who ends up snitching on an insurrection attempt. But there's a little bit of what they're dealing with, but there's no real focus on any of the nightmares of enslavement, from the brutality, the beating, the torture, a little bit of reference to selling off of family members and stuff like that, but very little of that. And you get overall more on John Brown is the one that brought all the violence. Couple other things. Frederick Douglass is not depicted well in this book at all. He's depicted as a PDF file and a lecherous person, because he tries, in knowing Onion is at most 14, if not, I think most, and usually depicted as 12, and thinking he's a girl. Douglass is depicted as drunkenly trying to do that thing, and it doesn't, Onion avoids him, but he's just kind of depicted as a drunk, doesn't like marriage. There's a line in there, he's like black or white, marriage is not the thing. He's depicted as a bougie, snob, elitist, and who is a friend to John Brown, but ultimately not supportive of his plan. And now then there's just other things that confuse me about. Well, another thing that I really liked about the book is that there is some discussion, more than I've ever heard, of what John Brown's plan actually was. Now, some things I've been reading parallel to this and listening to parallel to this contradict some of this. So for instance, in Du Bois's biography of John Brown, he has my favorite part in there where Harriet Tubman is willing to join John and just gets there late, as I remember Du Bois. Like, it's like her arrival, she's not going to be able to get there on time and can't help him. In the book, there's a brilliant, beautiful scene depicted where John Brown is up in Canada, and this is based on a real meeting where he's inviting these black and white abolitionists to come out of their liberalism and get busy. And they're all like, well, what's your plan? And he's like, I don't trust you liberal bougie talkers. I'm not giving you my plan. And then just as they're about to quit on him, Harriet walks in. And Captain John Brown acknowledges her as General Tubman. And Tubman gives this, which I'm sure cinematically, if it's in the series, although I think May describes it differently. So the series seems to do something different. Because in the book, Harriet shows up and says, if he's got a plan, then he's got a plan, and I'm down with the plan. So everybody, stop asking him questions and just be ready. Then after the meeting ends, they have this moment where the two of them are talking. Of course, Onion is there because that's the narrator. And Onion lets it know that Harriet Tubman can identify that this is actually a boy, because of course she knows hiding and all that kind of stuff very well. But what she says to John Brown in this powerful scene, very well written scene, she says, basically, I don't know what your plan is. And I'm just going, on your reputation and your word and all of that. And, we're on the same team. But you better have a plan, and it better be good. And then she emphasizes, be on time. Pick your time, stick to it, and be on time, because I'm going to bring you an army. I'm getting amped up now. I was even listening to it. I was like, oof, man, this is oof. She says, I'm going to bring you an army, but you got to be on time. You got to be on time. And she repeats it emphatically, be on time. You don't mess it. And that's why I keep saying and it reminded me of my what is always my criticism around this whole CP time and people being, no, because we're supposed to be building a movement. We need to be meticulous. Because I need to know when you say go, I'm going to go, and that you're going to go. And you can't be, well, I was a few minutes late. You know what I mean? So she said, not Umar's great uncle on his mom's side. That's messed up. That's messed up. Shame on you. But I was like, yes, be on time. Harriet was like, I was loving that. Spoiler alert. Not that we all don't know what happened in real life, at least, but spoiler alert, he's not on time. The timing gets messed up. And in the book, Harriet, the story disappears. And in the series, the way May depicts it, at least, Harriet doesn't do that second part about the time. She just is like, if you got a plan, you got a plan. And then that's it. And I would have loved for the book to do more to show what Harriet was up to. And unless I missed something or blacked out somewhere, we don't get that part. So I was like, well, what happened? What we do get is that John Brown had a plan, apparently. Now, this is somewhat disputed by his own words. I'm going to come to that in a little bit. And I don't know if he was telling the truth or not. But in the book, the plan is to involve the railway man, who in the series, May says was not involved with the plot, but in the book, the railway man, I should remember, I should have written his name down, but he is the one that sets the plan with Onion to as they say, hive the bees, to get the black people up and down the railway that he's working on to be ready. And they discuss this whole thing. He was like, a lot of the black folks around here in Harper's Ferry, they're not really going to be too much willing to take the risk. They're not really going to be down for this. I don't think they're going to be down for this. But I'm on the train and I'm down there with the numbers runners in DC and Baltimore. They'll be down and I'll get them on the train. So he is in the book. He is part of the plot. And then I think in real life, it's in dispute as to whether he's a part of the plot or not. But he is in real life and in the book and in the series, apparently, killed by one of John Brown's sons who doesn't, there's a miscommunication. In the book, it's blamed on Onion. So we don't know what happened in real life because Onion's not a real person. And I've not been able to read in anything or find out. I haven't read enough, at least, to reach clarity on, was this railway man involved or not? What happened with the confusion? How did John Brown's son end up not knowing who he was and his role in this and ends up shooting him? And then worse than that, he dies slowly. It takes him like a day to die, and his family, his kids come and he's gut shot. He's just dying. So I don't know. That part I'm not clear on either, and I'm not sure what the series does. But the book at least explains that part of the plan was to hive the bees, have all these Africans out here ready to rebel. Brown was going to raid. He had not only the guns he was going to get from Harper's Ferry, which they had meticulously studied. They knew how many guards there were, they had the lay of the land, and then the plan was it was supposed to be quick. Snatch the guns, snatch however many Africans you can, and use the train. Possibly use the train, which was also going to be bringing all these pikes and swords. Thousands of them John Brown had. And because he had raised money, he had this is also maybe mentioned a little bit, and I'll probably have to do more a part 2 on this because I'm running out of energy and time, and there's so much more I haven't gotten to. I misjudged the timing here, but they were going to free whoever they could, arm whoever they could, and then the plan was to lead a guerrilla, according to McBride's book at least, to lead a guerrilla warfare effort all up and down the Blue Ridge Mountains, to hide out in the mountain. And because of John Brown's life and his career and his knowing of the lay of the land, and he had mapped this all that, he will raid and then we'll escape. It was like a Maroon thing. And will make slavery an impossible situation. Will free so many people that the system will have to collapse. But according to McBride, and apparently it may use this as it happens in the series too, one of Brown's mistakes was when the train comes in and the train man is killed, they let the train continue on. instead of holding the train, which was supposed to be part of the plan. Because once the train leaves, then of course news goes with it that this thing is starting off. And then as I've read, you know, one of the biggest, it was like one of the most viral news stories of the day. News spread really quick. And then it didn't take long at all for and I didn't know this either, Robert E. Lee to be called in to suppress the rebellion. How about that? Brown is captured. They try to stab him. Apparently, his belt buckle saves him. He's tried, and I'm going to read his statement to the court in a moment. But he's tried, and then in a few weeks hung. And during those few weeks, something else I didn't really know. He wrote a lot of letters. He also had a plan. Like he had a plan for a provisional government, for what I'm going to show you, at least in someone's argument, was a goal for sort of a proto-socialist economy, all driven by his interpretation of the Bible, which you get a lot of in McBride's book, and it's all about God does not want slavery. God has shown me that this is, you know, he quotes his version of the scripture, and he's like, God wants me to get rid of this institution by any means necessary. You get a lot of his, actually, I'm confused. Did I get this from McBride's book or these other articles? But I've learned, you know, there's more discussion of his pre-Harper's Ferry life, his New York farm life that doesn't go well, his move to his being raised in, I think, Idaho, his move out to the Midwest. He tries to get into business. The business fails because, well, we'll come back to that. I'm going to come back to that. Let me just wrap this part up. So there is this remaining question that I have. Did Harriet Tubman support John Brown or not? Did she try to show up? Was it the timing that didn't happen, that failed? What exactly caused the timing to not happen? What happened with Harriet after, you know, John Brown's raid fails? What does she say about that part? I need to continue learning more about. I'd like to learn more about her reaction to that. But in the book, I really like that point. The scene is really powerful. I'm with him. Just be on time. He's not on time. All right. So I want to show a couple of these. Very interesting. We'll see let me see if I can make it through. Anyway, folks, thanks for hanging out. Please do like, share, subscribe, do all those things. Can we do a John Brown series? How do you mean? What exactly do you mean? Oh, peace, Shitty Matcha. Thanks for coming through. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Robert E. Lee was a monster, absolutely, but I just didn't know. I didn't know or remember knowing, if I ever did, that he had anything to do with the suppression of John Brown's. It's pretty interesting. All right, let me start with this one. So I just started looking some stuff up over these last few weeks because I just thought this was really interesting. And I just did not remember so many, or did not ever learn so many things. So first, now when I was an undergrad, I do remember doing this. I went, because I remember most of my life, if we heard anything about John Brown, it was always attached to, he may have been right, but he was crazy. Type of vibe. And I remember an undergrad going and reading his final statement at his trial and thinking the exact opposite. And then so I went and found it again for today, and I didn't remember that it was this short. But he's in court in Boston, 1859, and it's a short statement, but what he says here is very different. Now, again, he may have been trying to save his life. I don't know, you know. I mean, it's interesting because for the most part, he seems to say, like, I don't really care about my life. I'm doing the Lord's work. Whatever happens, happens. So I don't know. But he says here, you know, look, I intended certainly to have made a clean thing of the matter, as I did in the last winter when I went to Missouri and there took slaves without snapping of a gun on either side, moving them through the country and finally leaving them in Canada. I desired to have done the same thing again on a much larger scale. That was all I intended. I never did intend murder or treason or the destruction of property or to excite or incite slaves to rebellion or to make insurrection. In McBride's book, he's depicted as very much wanting insurrection, rebellion. He's very happy to kill pro-slavery people, whether they owned anyone or not, and to violently address himself to anyone in his crew that had any issues with what he was doing. Like so that part was weird to me. But this part was not weird, and I love this part. He says, I have another objection, and that is that it is unjust that I should suffer such a penalty. Had I interfered in the manner, and which I admit has been fairly proved, for I admire the truthfulness and candor of the great portion of the witnesses who have testified in this case, had I so interfered in behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or in behalf of any of their friends, either father, mother, brother, sister, wife, or children, or any of that class, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, it would have been all right. Every man in this court would have deemed it an act worthy of reward rather than a punishment. And we know, we around here know exactly what that is.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
He said, if I had done this on your behalf and went to slaughtering who and this, that, and the third, it'd have been all right. But he said, the Lord told me all things whatsoever I would that men should do to me, I should do even so to them. I believe that I have interfered as I have done, as I have always freely admitted I have done on behalf of his despised poor. I have done no wrong but right. I feel no consciousness of guilt. So as I was writing, remembering back in the day in undergrad, I was like, he wasn't crazy. He was clear. He was on point. And I heard even Malcolm, you'll bleed in the fields of Korea and Vietnam. But I say bleed for you, and you know, you want to hold hands and sing songs. John was, and in McBride's book, he's giving it to them liberals, boy. He's giving it to them liberals, boy. All they do is talk. Talk, 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 talk. He said, if all you're going to do is talk, then give me some goddamn money and shut up and mind your business and wait to see what I do with it. That was his whole attitude. And I was just like, oh man. And honestly, I was sitting there thinking, man, if I was one of them mulattoes in the room, I'd have been a sucker for that right there. That'd have been, because I am a locker room halftime speech. I'm susceptible. I'd have been in that room, and if Harry had walked in, boy, if I had been liberal 5 minutes before, I'd have been like, ow, ow. I'd have slid over them damn liberals. He was a real one. He was a real one. In that much, I'm convinced more than anything. Like whatever, he really believed what he believed, and he was like, we really. And again, as I said at the beginning, I think what he and George Jackson demonstrate is that they're both right. And it's uncomfortable, it's terrifying. I'm certainly not advocating, but it's because what is pretty clear is that even when in reading these articles, let me just bring up another one and stop referencing them and not, is that he precipitated something. He initiated something. He was the what is it? The impetus. He was the spark. It's just that it comes with great sacrifice, and that's the part I know I'm terrified of. And fear, hesitant about. but it's not wrong. It's that we do have to sacrifice and give something up and upset this setup. To shout out to my man DJ U-Rock back in the day. We have to upset this setup in a way that it can't function anymore. All right. So one of the articles I found that I thought was interesting was this: why white evangelicals should claim John Brown. We've forgotten what Charles Spurgeon knew. He was radical because of the Bible, and his soul is marching on. So what I ended up reading a lot from are white Christians and their very ongoing contemporary debate, which I admit was kind of interesting. Why white evangelicals should claim John Brown. Let me, is there John Brown was one of the most controversial figures in the history of the United States. For some, he's a moral hero. For others, he's a monster. And to me, that's a quick barometer for someone. What do you think of John Brown? He's a monster. Oh, we ain't good. We ain't not on the same team. All right, at the same time, John Brown became a curse in the mouths of white Southerners, and his name made white liberals blush. Indeed, one of those liberals, Julia Ward Howe, was so put off by the abolitionist evangelical militancy that she conjured more respectable lyrics for John Brown's song. She fixed it from her perspective with the high-minded Unitarian anthem, Battle Hymn of the Republic. I didn't know that. And in fact, I meant to play, let me go back to May's video real quick, because she plays something at the beginning. Let's see, it should be right here.
You ever hear this little ditty?
John Brown's body lies molding in the grave, but his truth still marches on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth still marches on.
So I don't remember thinking too much about it, but I've heard, when I've always known about that song. I think what I thought happened was that somebody repurposed the battle hymn for John Brown. And apparently the opposite is true. Catalyst. Thank you, Sugar Shan. Exactly. Thank you. My goodness. That was the John Brown song. So what May was showing us and what this article is pointing to is that John Brown, we've been taught, we've been conditioned in many ways to marginalize, forget, diminish, ignore, whatever. What these articles are showing me is that white America is still in an existential crisis propelled by John Brown's history and memory. And the fact that he was this committed Christian really messes them up. And that he was popular. So what McBride's book and these other articles are showing, and even I went and even watched the Yale professor David Blight. They have some of his lectures on, and I was a little mad at my man Dr. Burroughs because I thought he overhyped one of the videos too much, and that's why it's not featured today. Because Blight's the one lecture I saw, Blight doesn't really add much of value to what we're talking about here. But what he does mention is that, as a reminder, is how popular John Brown was. Now, either was famous or infamy, fame or infamy, but he was popular. And because of the I can never pronounce the massacre where he dragged some pro-slavery folks out of their house and hacked them up and their kids and all this, it was like, is that too aggressive? But because of that action and because of his work in Bleeding Kansas, as it was called, and his long war against pro-slavers, they had songs about him. So that, and people who supported him, you know, he was, to them, he was a hero. And in McBride's book, this is somewhat depicted as people move around and they have to deal with rumors, and is John Brown killed and is he alive? There's all this, you know, discussions and sometimes whispers of, you know, he's a great man, you know, the captain, oh, John Brown. So they had done this song about the, you know, now they were doing, now this is the contradiction to Brown that I'll come to in a minute again also, that he was a pro-American, pro-Christian abolitionist. So that's why you would still have the glory, glory, hallelujah, his truth goes marching on, and depicted with images of American flags and all this other kind of stuff, because he was all about the Union and all of that. He was just like, you got to get rid of the slavery part. All right, let me bring this article back up. So I just thought that was interesting, because I didn't know, I just didn't know that. And then they did they repurposed, what's her name, repurposes the song. What was her name again? Julia Ward Howe was so put off by the abolitionist evangelical militancy that she conjured up more respectable lyrics for John Brown's song. She fixed it, and it became the battle hymn of the Republic. Slavery itself was, I'm sorry. This is written by Luis DeCaro Jr., and it was in Christianity Today from 2022. Sorry about that. Need to be better with the citations. Slavery itself was sentimentalized in this era with lots of popular rhetoric and images of mammies and pickaninnies. Those who benefited from the system of white supremacy were depicted sympathetically, while those who defended it were imagined to be noble. Meanwhile, Brown, who hated slavery more than he loved his own life, was portrayed as insane. So that's where they're talking about a lot of the negative stereotypical imagery was coming from the propaganda to justify and the system, and then to condemn those who were critical of it. One place that Brown is not perceived as a brother, notably, is in evangelical history. I've yet to see one survey of Christianity in America that devotes space to Brown or any account of evangelicalism that includes him. Shame on the Christian world. At the time of Brown's failed attempt to end slavery by force, his faith was recognized. Those who opposed slavery for biblical reasons and shared Brown's commitments to Christ and Scripture hailed him as one of their own. During his incarceration in Virginia, he received sympathetic letters from Calvinist clergy and laity, including the notable Covenanter, I don't know, I'm not from Covenanter pastor Alexander Milligan, who later served as chaplain at large to the Union troops during the Civil War. He was called a prisoner of Jesus Christ in the congregational publication, the New York Independent. And he's buried in Lake Placid, New York, by the way, which I only remember for the Olympics they held there years ago, but you should be remembered for that. Then the author here brings up Charles Spurgeon, who, again, I don't pretend to know much about, but was apparently a very important figure. In 1860, shortly after the abolitionist was hanged, that is Brown, Spurgeon wrote to the Christian Watchman and Reflector to counter rumors that he was allowing U.S. publishers to redact statements about slavery from his sermons to make them more palatable to American readers. Spurgeon said he hadn't addressed slavery because he was preaching in Great Britain, where it was illegal. But his position should be clear. He would not partake of communion with a slaveholder, and were a slaveholder to come into his neighborhood, that man would receive a mark that he would carry to his grave if it did not carry him there. So come on, Christians, you have a militant tradition. If that violent response reminded anyone of Brown, Spurgeon had no qualms about the comparison. Brown was immortal in the memories of the good in England, he wrote, adding, "In my heart he lives." Come on, white Christians. This is a little bit about his history, going from Brown's early life into adopting belief and the divine authenticity of the Bible. Brown's Calvinism was conventional, more influenced by the Puritans of yesteryear than the novelists of New England theology. Writing of his youth, Brown recalled how he had witnessed a white man beating a black child with an iron shovel. He said he could not help but ask himself if God was not also the father of the victim of that atrocious violence. His answer was yes, and that shaped the rest of his life. When his namesake declared himself a spiritualist in 1853, this is him talking about his concern for his children losing their faith, and he's writing them towards the end of his life, and some of the letters come while he's awaiting his hanging. But he's basically saying, don't backslide, and I hope my children, return to the Lord. One may, of course, still question Brown's tactics and the way he put his faith into action in Bleeding, Kansas, and the raid on Harper's Ferry. I think the evidence shows that he was not driven, as has so often been alleged, by crazed bloodlust or violent megalomania. Indeed, Brown was actually averse to the unnecessary shedding of blood, according to the New York Times account from the time, and ordered his raiders to exercise great care lest innocent civilians be harmed. This again contradicts James McBride's book and one of the other articles that I might bring up here in a minute, but nonetheless, that's what it says here. The only anti-slavery reporter to cover the abolitionists' last days, an undercover journalist for the New York Tribune, characterized Brown's plan as the rescue of a great number of slaves, arguing he had no interest in maintaining a warlike position in Virginia for any definite period of time. So again, I have to say, obviously McBride's book is a novel, but the plan he describes in there is very different, and one that does call for sustained guerrilla warfare. I admit maybe my bias is I like that, but I don't know that in fact that's accurate. Although I'm not, rushing to put my trust in the depiction of an undercover New York Tribune writer, or even John Brown himself, as he's trying to save his life. But it may very well be that that's the case. The first draft of history, however, was mostly written by the pro-slavery press. The initial interpretation of Brown's actions was crafted by people who believed that all men are created equal was a lie. And I think that's an important point, again, that the press played a major role in promoting slavery, defending slavery, in depicting lynchings, in calling for the capture of escaped slaves, et cetera, and so forth. So I'm not surprised that they would also help shape the narrative of Brown as a monster. But why not John Brown, he asks his fellow Christians. Why not the most esteemed white man in Black history? And I thought, well, that's the answer to your own question, my dear brother, as Cornel West might refer. That might be it for your white Christians, that John Brown was so revered by Black people. I thought that must have been another article where they go into the Black community's affinity for Brown. But all right, but this is where I'm going to end on this one. This is, and I'm going to come back to this one at some point, because one, it's a full master's thesis that I've not read, and two, just as of this morning, I've been in touch with the author, and I'm thinking, there's some cause for an interview here. But I did find this thesis from 2023, "The Hands of God and the Glittering Sword: A Theological History of John Brown" by Christian Chiakolis. And I put a link to it in the show description if you all want to see it for yourself. But I thought what I've seen so far of it is fascinating. The political praxis of American abolitionist John Brown furnishes an example of practical liberation theology. This work advances an experimental historiographic model termed theological history, which combines the central insights of Christian liberation theology and Marxist historical materialism to draw both historical and theological conclusions about its subject, John Brown. Using the method of theological history, the thesis does these several things. 1, Brown's experiences in business combined with his understanding of Christian scripture and theology led him in later life to repudiate reformism, capitalism, and individuality and embrace revolution, utopian socialism, and communalism. So I'm going to read more about this argument around utopian socialism. Obviously, we around here prefer scientific socialism, but we might understand why John Brown might not have quite fully gotten to that stage. 2, the Potawatomi massacre, and I heard it said so many times in McBride's book, I still can't say the word. The Potawatomi massacre was influenced primarily by Brown's understanding of Puritan Edwardian theology, which led him to believe that he was acting as the hands of God to violently destroy the slave power that he believed controlled the United States. 3, the Provisional Constitution and later Declaration of Liberty of the slave population of America were Brown's attempts to outline his vision for an ideal post-slavery society, including the strand of socialism mentioned above, the legal enshrinement of Brown's version of Christian morality, and a radical egalitarianism of class, race, and gender. So that's, I just think that all sounds fascinating. And I have never heard, until I started reading this, any discussion, or I certainly don't remember any discussion of his provisional constitution and Declaration of Liberty of the slave population, which he wrote in 17, which he wrote on, not in 1770, but on July 4th. It's also a July 4th publication. Oh, this is one of my favorite lines. In 1834, John Brown was writing of using moral arguments to persuade Christian slave owners to free their slaves. A quarter of a century later, he was killing them and declaring that there was no such thing as a Christian slaveholder.
Now listen.
I love it. So just a little bit more from here. It's interesting. John Brown, he says, was not unique, not so much for his, I'm sorry, John Brown was unique, not so much for his religious beliefs. Many prominent abolitionists were Christians, as for a constellation of traits that combined to form what Frederick Douglass called a man of commanding mold, towering high and alone above the millions, free from all conventional fetters, true to his own moral convictions and law unto himself. His personality was unique, his class position was unique, et cetera, and so forth. And as it says here, that many black and white supporters, white abolitionists, could never have attained, even though their thoughts, he says, even his personality was unique, inspiring confidence among his black contemporaries that other white abolitionists could never have attained. Even when they thought his insurrectionary plans foolish, they could not help but be inspired by his character. They believed in John Brown, but not his plan, wrote Du Bois of the majority of black abolitionists, including Douglass himself. Brown was also unique indeed. No other white people, save for those that specifically followed Brown, were willing to resort to violence, even extreme and preemptive violence, in the cause of black liberation from slavery. Brown not only gave his life for liberation, but watched 3 of his sons die for it, and still he never wavered in his conviction that slavery is wrong. Kill it, destroy it, uproot it, stem, blossom, and branch, give it no quarter, exterminate it, and do it now. This uniqueness earned Brown the posthumous admiration of many in the black radical tradition, such as Malcolm X. Quoting Malcolm, if a white man wants to be your ally, what does he think of John Brown? You know what John Brown did? He went to war. So when you want to know what good white folks in history, where black people are concerned, go read the history of John Brown. And then the author argues liberation theology is the best lens through which to understand not only Brown's legacy, but even his actions and motivations during his life. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I skipped ahead a little bit. I wanted to start to read a part of this thesis that talks about John Brown's experience in business. And I thought this was fascinating. I had never known anything about it. And there are just still too many overlaps. John Brown was never as well off as his father Owen would come to be, but at least going to Kansas, he always maintained a semblance of financial independence and owned his own land, even through a series of failed business ventures. His class position was that of the rural petty bourgeois artisan producer, which has important bearings on his practice as an abolitionist. So none of this was really talked about in McBride's book, which is again why I would understand, especially the way it's talked about here, why I could understand it becoming a bestseller and why it would be turned into a series. There's some discussion in McBride's book we hear about the poverty Brown leaves his wife and children to suffer while he's out fighting for Black people. We hear about him delivering large sums of money when necessary to pay off this one and bribe that one and to fund this effort and that. But we don't hear about where that money comes from, and we don't hear much about any of these efforts in business, or what becomes his critique and his goal for business. I didn't know this either. His father was killed apparently during the so-called War of Independence in 1776. He's influenced by Jeffersonian agrarianism, something I would want to talk with the author more about, to read more about separately at some point, what all that entails. But the point that the author is getting to is that agrarianism, Jeffersonian or otherwise, was doomed to fail. And the headline, not going through all the detail of this thesis and the detail of the political economy of the day more broadly, but the headline is that the manufacturers organize themselves to dominate the farmers. Industrial capital takes over. So Jefferson didn't see it. John Brown was struggling against it. And here we are in 2026, and we're still struggling with that reality. At one point, they're talking here about John Brown entering the wool growers business. And it says here, Brown attempted to organize wool growers into a producers union of sorts in order to gain better dealings with the wool merchants, those many scattered customers now concentrated into a great market provided for by industrial capital. The idea of the association was that all their wool should go there, be graded, sold, and each to share proportionally in the price according to quality, fineness, cleanliness. But Brown was not a regular bread merchant. His sense of justice and fairness ran up against the realities of capitalist economy. The only apparent danger to the prosperity of the Western wool growers was the increasing power of the manufacturers. No sooner did John Brown grasp the details of the wool business than he began to work out plans of amelioration. So another reason why Du Bois, and I don't remember if he wrote about this, but why Du Bois would have had an affinity for Brown is that Brown starts trying to basically evolve cooperatives and socialism, and he conceived of this amelioration not as measured simply in personal wealth. To him, business was a philanthropy. We have not even today reached this idea, but urged by the socialists, we are faintly perceiving it. Brown proposed nothing quixotic or unpractical, but he did propose a more equitable distribution of the returns of the whole wool business between the producers of the raw material and the manufacturers. Yet a combination of manufacturers forced him out of business in a few months. Brown believed in the independent yeoman producer for most of his life, and the author connects this to his understanding of religious teachings. But this ideal ran up against a slowly industrializing world that concentrated power in the hands of those with capital, with industrialists and proto-industrialists who recognized no higher moral law than money-making. And this is, I made a note because I would want to ask or learn more about this, but Brown commented, we haven't, and it's argued here that this is a sign of him understanding and even predicting where the economy was going to go. But I don't claim to fully understand this. So, but Brown said, we have in this part of the country the strongest proofs that the great majority have made gold their hope, their only hope. I think that almost every product of industry will soon become high from the fact alone that such a vast number of those who have hitherto been producers will cease to be so, and hereafter, for a time at least, be only consumers. Uneducated though as he was in economics, much less political economy, he saw the very process we are describing with his very eyes. So is he saying here that there will become a monopoly of production that will reduce everyone else to consumers, and that's why we're in a 70% consumer-based economy today in the United States? Is that what he's saying? And in which case he was saying we need to find ways to more equitably redistribute the wealth we're all helping to produce, and that this mulatto descendant of the slaves I'm trying to free today will in 2020 and again in 2023, continuing in 2026, to be correct in his own argument about buying power? Am I seeing that? I feel like I'm seeing that. I feel like I'm seeing John Brown agree with me and say years from now will come this brilliant mulatto son of a slave all right, but I want to end where this thesis ends, and then I'm going to come back to it at some point and invite the author to a discussion and learn more, because I find this fascinating, and I obviously haven't read the whole thesis. But in the epilogue here, the John Brown Manifesto, he starts off with a Frederick Douglass quote. Speaking at an anti-slavery convention in Salem, Ohio, I expressed the apprehension that slavery could only be destroyed by bloodshed, when I was suddenly and sharply interrupted by my good old friend, Sojourner Truth, with the question, Frederick, is God dead? No, I answered. And because God is not dead, slavery can only end in blood. While waiting to strike the blow at Harper's Ferry, John Brown and his son Owen drew up their Declaration of Liberty, which has been mentioned in chapters 4 and 6, which I'll have to go back and read. This document serves as a more obviously ideological function than the Provisional Constitution, being concerned with the morality and theology behind Brown's actions rather than organizational bylaws and procedures. Both documents are fundamentally in dialogue and tension with the American founding documents they are modeled after, though they were written in reverse order. Dated July 4th, 1859, a Declaration of Liberty by the representatives of the slave population of the United States of America stands as the last long-form ideological document John Brown would write. It is the capstone to a lifetime spent fighting oppression in whichever way seemed best to him at the time, as he prepared for the most revolutionary act yet. Taken together, the Provisional Constitution and Declaration of Liberty stand as the closest thing we have in text form to a John Brown manifesto. The most important line in my reading is the one that comes near the beginning. It is self-evident, Brown says, that it is the highest privilege and plain duty of man to strive in every reasonable way to promote the happiness, mental, moral, and physical elevation of his fellow man, and that people or clannish oppressors who wickedly violate this sacred principle will bring upon themselves that certain and fearful retribution, which is the natural and necessary penalty of evildoing. This statement is important for both its negative and positive aspects. First, it fundamentally recognizes society as reciprocal, communitarian, and altruistic. It is the self-evident duty of all people to live for each other. Second, and equally important, is that it is not only natural but necessary to serve retribution to the oppressors who violate this principle. He was fanoning before. No, I'm just saying. All right. But John Brown's manifesto lies ultimately not in words or beliefs, but deeds. James Cone wrote that for white people to truly be in solidarity with the oppressed, they must undergo a process of conversion wherein they die to whiteness and are reborn anew in order to struggle against white oppression and for the liberation of the oppressed. But that it is the Black community that decides both the authenticity of white conversion and also the part these converts will play in the Black struggle for freedom. The author then says that the only other white American who earned such consistent praise from the Black radical tradition is Marilyn Buck. And I wonder, does David Gilbert not get in there? I don't know. But salute to Marilyn Buck for sure. And then just lastly here, the only other white American who earned such consistent praise from Black radical tradition is Marilyn Buck, who spent her life in prison to help Assata Shakur escape Cuba. Reynolds, I forgot who the Reynolds is being referenced here. Who is the Reynolds being referenced here? David S. Reynolds includes a long list of important Black figures from Frederick Douglass to Du Bois to Eldridge and Malcolm X who appreciated John Brown. And then Reynolds says, there was in John Brown a complete identification with the oppressed. It was his child that the slave owner was selling, his sister who was being whipped in the field, his wife who was being R-worded in the gin house. It was not happening to Negroes, it was happening to him. Thus it was said that he could not bear to hear the word slave spoken. And at the sound of the word, his body vibrated like the strings of a sensitive violin. John Brown was a Negro, and it was in this aspect that he suffered. Any individual may or may not agree with Bennett's assessment. Oh, that was Lerone Bennett who said that? I thought that was Reynolds. Oh no, they're quoting Lerone Bennett. That's my fault. It was right. Sorry about that. But what cannot be denied is that John Brown strove for this kind of recommendation from Black people. So, oh, I did like this part. The author here critiques someone else's paper in which John Brown is compared to the Weathermen in some disturbing way, apparently. But what I like is that to conclude, I wish to return for a moment to Bertram Wyatt Brown's odious paper on John Brown and the Weathermen, discussed in Chapter 7. Though I am confident that I have excoriated it enough, there is one more false assertion Wyatt Brown makes that is worth addressing. This false assertion does not deal directly with John Brown, but in a way it has everything to do with John Brown. And this sort of I felt affinity for because it seems to speak to my concerns with the Peniel Josephs of the world and so on and so forth. Wyatt Brown writes of an eclectic California group that wrote a manifesto called Armed Love. The false assertion Wyatt Brown makes is that it was a paradoxical title and that the two entities are incompatible, but they are not. Hate is the opposite of love, and John Brown hated nothing and nobody but oppression and oppression and oppressors, which is simply to say that in true dialectical fashion, he loved the oppressed. The idea that arms, weapons, and love are paradoxical and incompatible is among the most pernicious of liberal society. For it does nothing but equate the unjust violence of the oppressors who maintain the despicable system with the just violence of the oppressed, and obscure the reality that no one can be nonviolent in an unjust society. It is nothing but a way for defenders of the status quo to cry peace, peace when there is no peace. Thomas Sankara once observed that no altar, no belief, no holy book has ever been able to reconcile the rich and the poor, the exploiter and the exploited. And if Jesus himself had to take the whip to chase them from his temple, it is indeed because that is the only language they hear. Amen. Che Guevara said all revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love, and he was correct. Armed love, weapons, worship, violence, devotion, war, liberation. The oppressed masses know that these are not opposites, but integral to each other. They go together. They went together when John Brown and his 19 men so true frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through, and they went together the night he took up that glittering sword in the name of liberation. Oppressed people of all faiths, races, genders, and nationalities know in their hearts that indeed the stars above in the heaven now are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown.
Now listen, that's
all right, good people. Way longer than I thought I would end up going today, and obviously there's still more to get to, so we'll just come back another time. And it is a must read. Please check the link in the show description. And look, a natural hater. That's what I'm saying. Bennett with the hyperbole. Yeah, he could write a word or two. Yeah, Buck and Gilbert are about that life. Yes. So anybody real quick, any comments, thoughts on any of this criticism, comments, cacophony, calumny, consternation, contemplation? I do appreciate you all coming through today. Hope you all hit that like button, do all them things on the way out, and I'm just checking my notes here. So let me just conclude quickly and say that again, John Brown, I am more convinced. I am more now convinced. John Brown, I am more now convinced, also in conjunction with George Jackson, demonstrates what today is likely needed. Brash, direct, incontrovertible actions that also likely demand great sacrifice, and that this will force liberal non-actors into their roles of bourgeois mollifying and revolutionaries to further challenge them. But I do, and sometime we'll come back. I think I'll want to have a discussion maybe with some others about that. Because again, catalyst, thank you, Sugar Shane. What is clear to me in the McBride book, for whatever its shortcomings, what I do like about it is that what rings through clearly is Brown was like, I'm not for this liberal nonsense. And having read a little bit of this thesis, I have a better understanding. He was like, look, I tried this. I studied the Bible. I tried to talk to you preachers and Christians. I tried to do this business thing. I tried to set up this farm. And the problem is slavery. And you all don't want to, like, you're not going to stop off of some kind words. The liberals are not going to do nothing but talk. So I just got to get a crew. I got to get some resources relatively. And this is the other thing I take from that. He did a lot with a little. So this whole thing of, oh, we got to raise endless money first, and we have to have, endless well-funded positions, and no. And I think what we're all afraid of, me, number one fear, number one scared dude up in the front of the line, is that I know George and John were right. And I'm not doing it. Wouldn't advocate anyone else, but levels of confrontation with the established order have to take place. And even if they're short-lived, even if they're incomplete, even if they don't lead to the fully formed Virginia government at one point, because they're talking about he had a plan for the governance of Virginia with himself as the leadership and all this, and reordering the economy and all this. Like, even if you don't get to that, or the version I was also liking in McBride's book, the clarity he seemed to have around the use of the terrain and the the guerrilla warfare opportunities and what impact this would have on the system of slavery, forcing it to shut down, forcing people to adjust themselves, but creating action that would make people. And then as we're reading in Blood in My Eye again, George is saying all of this stuff about the perfect conditions and all, that's liberal nonsense. I'm reading these things in maybe this the recency bias or whatever in the overlap, but John and George were saying the same thing 100 years apart. You liberals just want to talk. They will talk all day because they're not changing. So they're happy to listen to you or to ignore you or to watch, they're not changing. And then what we could say that these were incomplete. We could say that these plans were flawed. We could say that they certainly would prevent my liberal middle-class bourgeois life. But the sacrifice that these men and the people with them made forced levels of change. Now, I would argue if that's kind of the way I wrote, why I wrote what I wrote, the way that little summary, the way I wrote it, that the incompleteness of the revolution does lead to the system to adjust and to increase its sophistication in the form of its repression and oppression. So it's not to say that you get what you want, but we get nothing without these brash acts of incontrovertible, unavoidable, even incomplete. And just reading these simultaneously again is George is very clear. Ain't gonna be no perfect conditions, and what you're gonna, you're not gonna get some perfect candidate, and it's a false liberal claim. In fact, I don't know why I'm struggling. It's right here. Now again, we could say he's wrong, but the arguments are very similar. And I admit moving. They're moving. And it's kind of like, because George had some more time and whatever, he can move and be, he had the benefit of some history that he could move to say that we have the foundation of our strategy. We have studied Marx and Lenin for description and history of the modern industrial state. And the modern industrial state was just beginning at John Brown's time. And he was realizing it took him out. We clearly cannot dodge our responsibilities by giving credence to slogans building around conditions. Conditions will never be altogether right for a broadly based revolutionary war unless the fascists are stricken by an uncharacteristic fit of total madness. Should we wait for something that is not likely to occur for decades? The conditions that are not present must be manufactured. And then, yes, I know there's criticism of vanguard ideology and that, and he goes into talk about the vanguard and this, that, but I'm moved by it. I admit it. I'm moved by it because I still think because where are these perfect conditions going to be? I know I'm tripping and I am tired. I'm not clear anymore. So I am going to stop there, but I did want to wrap with that point. I mean, that's true. If you're not willing to fight for the freedom, to stop talking about it. But they are in there. But see, that's the thing. Liberals have redefined struggle and fight as writing a nice essay or deleting their Starbucks app, which we should all do if you have one still for some reason. That's fine. But they've redefined that as struggle. So they are fighting. Don't you see me fighting? Oh, wait a minute. Robert Tran, did you actually subscribe did you actually subscribe with more than 24 hours ago just so you could show up in the live and comment this? I don't know what soul is. So soul is measured in melanin? Yo, you're a clown, dude, and I don't even know who you are. But go ahead and you know what? Send me an email and let me know who you are, and we can talk about it. And you can let me know how you got it all, you got all the real and all the melanated soul and all of that. You know, so I am going to ban you now, but feel free to email me. Make sure you identify yourself, Robert Tran 8450. And, you know, or just feel free not to come around again. I'm not trying. What does he say? I forgot. I deleted the comment. Light skins trying to be the god of black people. As my short godfather has said repeatedly, is that your argument? What would you say if I was tall? So, Robert, what would you say if I was as dark as you would want me to be? So, given my discussion this afternoon, what would your argument in response be to George and John and to all the other discussions if I was 100% black and dark as night? What then would your argument be? And send that to me in an email. I would love to read it. But the clownish part of it, though, is that I set the comments for a reason, and you subscribed and waited 24 hours just to show up late in this live and say some dumb stuff. That is the most, as my children might say, pick me, pressed, desperate nonsense that an anonymous YouTube chatter could do. That is fascinating. And welcome, Summoner Greek, with the anarchist A. There you go. Let's bring it back to some goodness. Love you, Doc Jabs. So glad you found my friend's thesis. Oh, you know, dude. Chicago communists are excited. Oh, wow. Commie preacher. Let's go. I'm loving the thesis so far. So I'm glad I found it. The atheist God perfectly said. I'm moving needles. That's what that means. You sub during the Two Black interview. That's why I invite him. How else am I going to get people to subscribe if I don't invite Two Black to the platform? I'm smart. Appreciate you. Edifying, enjoyable, inspiring. Hey, I love it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We can end on these good notes. Listen, everybody. Even with dude, I had a good time today. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you. Salute to all the work that I referenced today and the people doing better work than I'm doing. Do all the things to support the platform. And remember, Newark on Saturday. With Saturdays with Renee, and yeah, stay tuned. More stuff coming too. I just went blank. I'm tired. I've gone way past. So let's see. Yeah, do all the things. Thank you very much. I'm missing something. Where's my notes? I'm missing something. There was something I was supposed to, but I think I did all of that. Okay. Peace, everybody. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time.
And what do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, the set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.